was a brief period of time that I lived alone. When I freshly moved out of my parents' house and before I met my girlfriend and she moved in, I lived in a small one-bedroom apartment in the downstairs of someone else's house. I spent a lot of time alone during this period of my life, besides when I was at school or work, and so I spent a lot of my time watching movies. Specifically, I liked watching scary movies pretty often. Even as an at-the-time 21-year-old guy, I still would be a little spooked trying to sleep after watching a scary movie, especially living alone in that apartment, and every time I did, I would look around the room. At a few points, I would even turn the bedside lamp on just to check around the room. The tenant upstairs wasn't home that night, as his car wasn't in the driveway, so the sounds I was hearing couldn't have been footsteps upstairs or anything like that. My nerves were really starting to set in at one point because I just kept hearing noises, and to be honest, I couldn't tell from where in the house they were coming from. I got up to head over to the door of the bedroom and opened it. Outside of my bedroom was a very narrow hallway, which had a door to the bathroom, and then at the end of the hallway opened up to the living room. At the end of this hallway though, like a scene right out of the movie I had watched not even an hour earlier, there was someone standing at the far end of the hallway right by the kitchen. The moonlight from outside coming into the bedroom windows and the windows in the living room was enough to see her, this woman looking right back at me. She started to walk backwards while still facing me. I didn't care though, I still screamed and backed into my room before slamming the door shut and locking it. She didn't come running over and pounding on the door or anything like that. Instead, I heard running up the half flight of stairs to the exit of my apartment, and then the door slammed shut. I was frozen in shock for at least 10 minutes, before I felt okay to take my phone and leave the bedroom to check the apartment. It didn't take long. It was a small apartment with not many hiding places. It was empty. I rushed to lock the door, wondering who that could have been and how they got in. I didn't call the police. I couldn't tell you why, but the next day I called the landlord and told him about it. He made a phone call to the upstairs tenant, and what I learned shocked me. The woman that broke into my apartment was an ex-lover of the man who lived upstairs, a crazy one at that, and after finding his address somehow, she broke into the wrong part of the house, my apartment. The upstairs tenant came down to my door and apologized to me that following day, but I never got much detail from him or the landlord. I still wonder what that woman was planning on doing to him. I'm not a fan of my dad's girlfriend at all, not from the start. Her name is Kathy. My dad has been widowed since 2019 when our mom died, and I know he's gotten lonely and he's pretty much ready to settle with anybody now, even Kathy, and against my warnings, he doesn't listen. I've been seeing her do some sketchy things around the house, and it's really starting to freak me out now. I'll start from the beginning. I have two siblings, my 10-year-old brother Jake and my 2-year-old brother Scotty. From the day he introduced her to us, I didn't like something about her smile. It was just unsettlingly wide and exaggerated. Pretty soon he'd start bringing her around a lot more, and I just never loved her honestly. But at first it was only because I felt something was off about her personality. Then things started happening. She's been staying with us for a while now, and a few weeks ago, I caught her in my dad's closet while he wasn't home. My dad's safe is in his closet, along with where he hides the combination and some other valuables. When she saw me at the doorway, she smiled and said, "Hey, what's up, sweetie," to me, with her annoying, creepy smile. I didn't say anything other than nothing. Then she shut his closet door, and I walked away to my room. I told my dad about it, but he didn't seem concerned. A few days after that, while my dad was at work again, I just got back from school, and I was walking upstairs to my room. And as I saw Kathy leave my little brother Jake's room and shut the door behind her. I asked her what she was doing in his room. She smiled and said, "I was just opening the window, it's hot in the house." I didn't answer and walked up to my room. When I heard her go downstairs eventually, I snuck to Jake's room to check if she actually had opened the window, and both windows were shut. Something was up with this lady, and I knew it, and I still know it. I told my dad again, and in response, he asked me to just please be patient with the situation, and that he knows I don't care for Kathy. I didn't bother telling Jake. Fast forward to 2 days ago. Jake, my dad, and I were all not home, and Kathy was babysitting Scotty. I came home unannounced, but I wanted to be secretive about it, because I wanted to see if I could catch her doing anything again. I snuck into the house and went to my room quietly. Eventually, from the kitchen downstairs, I started to hear Scotty crying. Not regular crying, like a very distressed kind of crying, and I heard Kathy screaming at the top of her lungs to shut the F up. It was the first time I heard her raise her voice, and I believe it was the first time I was hearing her true colors come out. I ran downstairs to yell at her to leave my brother alone. She was startled and shocked that I was home, and for the first time, she didn't give me her creepy smile. She looked at me blankly and went downstairs and shut the door. I called my dad and told him right away, and that night, my dad had a conversation with her about it. I don't know how it went, but I assume not good, because that night, I woke up in the middle of the night to something, and looked up into my room. There was someone in my room, and they quickly left the room and shut the door behind them. I got out of bed and opened my door, and as I got into the hall, I saw and heard my dad's bedroom door close. I went over to my dad's room and opened the door, and both Kathy and my dad were laying in the bed. I woke my dad up furiously and told him Kathy was just in my room. She denied the whole thing, saying she was in bed. I don't know if my dad believed me or not, but he told me to go back to my room and he'd talk with Kathy. I obeyed, and I heard them whispering as I shut the door. I went back to bed, and I was scared. I'm still scared. I want her out of the house and out of our lives. I think she's dangerous. Why was she in my room? It's freaking me out. I worry for my family's well-being, and I don't know what we can do. This one goes back a few years ago to when I was 30 years old. I was at my condo in Fort Lauderdale, Florida. My condo, which I still own, is on the second floor of a decently nice building that I won't name for privacy reasons. Whenever I go down there, it's in the colder months up north, and I'm a complete beach bum when I go down there. Luckily for me, I work remotely from my job through my laptop and phone, so I've been able to retreat down there whenever I'd like. Fort Lauderdale is for the most part a pretty clean and safe city, and the specific location my building is in is no exception. That is, usually. It was the middle of January. It was late at night, past 10 o'clock. I was out on my balcony with my feet over the railing, on my laptop, when all of a sudden I heard from down below on the ground someone yelling something. They were yelling, "Yo," and "Hey you." At first I didn't move, taking the assumption that whoever it was talking to someone else. They couldn't possibly be calling up to me. But they followed with, "Hey you up there." And my heart skipped a beat, because now I knew they were talking to me, and my main question was, why? I set my laptop down on the chair and looked over the railing down to the ground below. There was a guy in front of a car in the parking lot, looking up at me, and he said, "Yeah, you." I asked, "What's up?" He told me to come down there so he could show me something cool. I took a better look at this guy, some guy with a backwards hat and tank top on. I assumed he was just some punky kid messing with me, so I ignored him and sat back down. When I did that, I heard him laughing as he said, "I'm gonna come up there and skin you alive, you prick." I stood up again and looked at him. He had this unsettling and sinister smile on his face. I realized he looked older than I initially thought. He wasn't some kid. I literally opened my mouth to shout something back at him, but for some reason, I didn't bother. I grabbed my laptop and went inside and shut the sliding door. I expected him to yell up a couple things afterwards, but I didn't hear him do so. As uncomfortable as that made me, I felt much safer being inside. I chalked it up to just the occasional coked-up Florida lunatic on the streets. But things became next level when the silence of the room was broken by pounding on my condo door, accompanied with a voice yelling obscenities and threats at me. It was the guy again. The bangs were so loud I was genuinely concerned he was going to break the door down. All I could do was yell, "I'm calling the police." That didn't faze him. His bangs turned to these carving and stabbing noises. It probably all lasted for about a minute or two, but felt like a century, until he gave one more loud angry bang, screamed one more obscenity at me, then left. I knew because I checked through the peephole. I called the police after the ordeal just to show them and report it to them. On the other side of the door, there were several stab marks in it, confirming I did hear him stabbing at it and confirming this man had a knife. I pray nobody was harmed that night. I doubt he knew me. I think he was just a really drugged out crazy person looking to hurt someone. I once spent a night in jail. I know everyone says it, but I didn't do shit. I was attacked by a bouncer at a nightclub in my hometown because some girl who I had history with was there, and she had the nerve to lie to a bouncer and tell him I was touching her and her friends inappropriately, when I never even said a word to them. The bouncer came and put his hands on me and started pushing me out of the club, and honestly I pushed back in my drunken state. And of course cops were outside the bar, and between a drunk guy and a club bouncer, who are they going to side with? Well, I end up handcuffed in the back of a cop car and I'm escorted to jail, where I spent the night. All that was in this cell was one wooden bar for sitting on, and this other guy besides me. He asked what I'm in for, and I told him for bullshit. I took one look at the guy and I knew I didn't belong here. He had tattoos on his face, he was missing a front tooth, and he just had this face that said, "Don't mess with me or I'll cap you." I didn't want to rub him the wrong way, so I just tried talking with him if he talked to me. At one point, I did open up to him a bit just because of my anger at the situation and I needed to vent. During this time, I told him some delicate info, like where I was from, which is definitely the nicer side of town. I told him how I had people over that night since my parents were away, and we all pre-gamed and went to the club. I basically told him the rundown of the whole night. Since I was drunk, I wanted to just try and sleep, but he'd keep talking to me and it was getting annoying. Eventually, I think he caught on and shut up. The next morning, we had to go to court because, yes, sadly I was charged with assault and trespassing. 2 bogus charges. My cellmate had to go too. I saw the judge before him though. He was one of the other offenders in the back of the court listening to my charges. I was released with a future court date set. A complete nightmare. But that night, when I was at home, and all the windows were open so I heard everything from outside, I was hearing footsteps circling the house. Multiple sets of footsteps. I started to shut all my windows one by one on the first floor. Then I got to the backyard door, which is a sliding glass door looking out to the deck. I curiously flicked on the deck light, and immediately, 2 dudes ran out from the light into the darkness. I recognized one of them to be my cellmate. I closed the blind to the door and continued closing the rest of the windows. I couldn't believe he found me, but he was obviously there to rob our house blind after I told him how my parents were away. He must have seen dollar signs when I told him the side of town I was in, and he probably heard my name called in the courtroom, and one quick Google search of my simple name turned up my address. The 2 dudes took off, I believe, because I didn't hear from them the rest of the night. I never told my parents I was arrested, and because of that, I never told them about how my cellmate almost came and robbed our house. This is something that just happened to me, and I don't know how to feel about it other than freaked out. I'm not a spiritual person at all. I've been on and off seeing this guy named Spencer. I met him through a coworker one night when we were out together at a bar, and we hit it off. I finally introduced him to my family, and while my parents were indifferent about him, my grandparents didn't really care for him, my grandma especially. They both said they saw something bad in him, that he doesn't seem like a good guy. My grandma mostly. This wasn't after one-time meeting though. This was after I brought him around multiple times and everyone could get a good idea about him. And honestly, I started to see what they meant because Spencer and I would get into constant arguments and he would lose his temper fairly easy on me. For this, we'd be on and off constantly. There was one night that I felt like he was about to raise his hands to me, but he held back and then calmed down. This was when I said, "I'm done," and dropped him. Or so I thought I was going to. My grandma was especially happy and said I could do much better. Then she went on about how I should go find a nice Italian boy from a nice family like she always did. Anyway, not long after this, my grandma died of a heart attack. During my grieving, I hung a picture of my grandma up on my wall in my room to commemorate her. This was only a month ago. I'd been having a horrible month. And out of weakness, when Spencer reached out to me 2 weeks ago, I answered, and we saw each other. We had been seeing each other every night these past 2 weeks, and I really thought he had changed because we hadn't argued a single time, and I just felt safe around him. Well, only a few days ago, Spencer and I agreed to be official boyfriend and girlfriend, and that night, I woke up to a crash in my room. I panicked and flicked on the lamp, and it took me a moment to notice the picture of my grandma wasn't on the wall anymore. I got up and saw the frame had fallen to the floor and cracked. The picture frame I hung of my grandma had fallen and cracked on the night I agreed to date Spencer. I held the frame in my hand, my heart in my throat, my whole body shaking. I called Spencer the next day and told him I think we should go our separate ways for a while, as my head isn't in the right place. And he blew up on the phone in anger, and that phone call proved my grandma was right about him. But that picture frame falling and breaking, what could have caused it? There was no draft in the room. Even as I imagined that it was somehow a sign for my grandma, do you realize how freaking scary that is? I took my Jeep on a road trip to Colorado to do some off-roading in the wilderness. I was doing a bunch of trails in the Red Feather Lakes, and I was ending the night off on the Dead Man's Road Trail. It was a somewhat challenging trail, but the scenery was unbeatable. I packed a sleeping bag, and planned on sleeping in the back of my Jeep with the back seats folded down. I pulled somewhere off the immediate trail, just off the slight chance some other night drivers would pass by. But that was very unlikely. I guess people can call me a weirdo for enjoying off-roading on my own and camping alone, but I've always liked doing things solo. I use the word camping because I do consider this to just be luxury camping. Instead of being in a tent, I'm in the back of my Jeep in the middle of the woods. I ate some of the protein bars and other snacks I brought as my little dinner. Then I set up my sleeping bag in the back. In case you're wondering if I was doing this in the dark, I had the LED light bar on my Jeep on, which basically lit up the entire surrounding area pretty nicely. So I finally crawl into the sleeping bag, and I'd be lying if I said it's comfortable sleeping back there. It's the price to pay for off-roading in the sunrise for me. I had the windows all closed to avoid bugs getting in, but I still heard everything outside. And then it happened. I heard a voice from out in the woods, followed by a short, loud laughter. As deep into the trail I was, there's no way someone was just walking around out there. Not in this total darkness. I looked out the windows expecting to see headlights or taillights somewhere, but nope. Then I heard the voice again, much clearer. I couldn't tell if it was a man or a woman at first. I was shaking now though. Someone was out there, that much was clear. Though I was hearing a voice, I didn't know what was being said just yet. And then I laid there, waiting for it again, scared to death. For a while, just crickets. Then, much closer now, I heard in a clear voice, belonging to either a woman or a young boy, "Hello, I see you there." Now I was ready to throw up. I wanted to move to the driver's seat and drive, but I was too scared to move. I felt like if I just stayed laying down, that whoever was out there wouldn't see me. I know that makes no sense, but hiding and not moving was me clinging on to the hope that this wasn't actually happening. Then, there was one loud bang on my rear windshield, and I jumped up and practically dove over the two front seats into the driver's seat. And I started the car and drove as quickly as I could manage down the trail, scared they were running after me because I could only go so fast on this rocky terrain. I was scared to look in the rearview mirror, but when I did, I didn't see anyone through the red glow of my taillights. It was a nightmare. I was tired, but drove the rest of the trail until I was back on pavement. Then I drove for miles until I reached a motel. Some people have asked me, what if it was someone stranded who needed help? And I say no way. No one's out there that late in the pitch black, laughing without a flashlight that deep on some trail. And they wouldn't bang on my windshield just once like that if they weren't trying to scare me. People are messed up. Always watch your back and be woke to your surroundings. This is one of the few unexplainable events I've experienced in my life. I was home upstairs in my room, writing my paper for my history class. As far as I knew, I was home alone. But apparently I was mistaken, because my mom's voice called out from downstairs, yelling my name. I called back, "What?" She didn't answer. So, slightly annoyed because I didn't want to be interrupted from my train of thought on my paper, I reluctantly got up to go downstairs and see what she wanted. When I got downstairs, I looked around for my mom, but she wasn't anywhere in sight. So I yelled out, "Mom?" And she yelled back my name in response. Her voice came from down in the basement. So I went to the basement door, but strangely the lights were off. I called down the stairs, "Mom?" again, and she called back. I yelled out, "What are you doing down there with the lights off?" She didn't respond. I flicked on the light and went down the stairs. I heard my mom call my name again as I was near to the bottom of the steps. It was getting weird. Each time she called my name, it sounded exactly the same. Like there was zero difference in inflection every single time she said my name. I yelled out "Mom" again, and she once again yelled back my name. She was nowhere to be seen in the basement, but then I noticed the little crawl space closet door was open. I call it that because it's a weird closet that you have to kind of crawl into, but it takes up a large chunk of the basement. That was the only place left in the basement that my mom could be. So I said "Mom" one final time. No answer this time. I went closer to the closet door and got on my knees just to try and look in. It was pitch black inside, and I was starting to get freaked out. I said, "Mom, are you messing with me?" There was no response at all, just the quiet buzzing sound from the basement light. I got back up and for some reason decided to sprint back upstairs, slamming and locking the basement door behind me. I didn't know what I had just witnessed and heard, but I went to grab the house phone and call my mom's cell number. It rang a few times until my mom picked up, and I learned that she was out grocery shopping. I told her, but she didn't believe my story, of course. She thought I was messing with her. It took half an hour of begging her to believe me that she finally went along with it, and when she and my dad were both home, we all went down to the basement together. The closet door was still open. My dad went inside, but there was no one in there. This still remains to be the most haunting, unexplainable experience of my life. I was only about 9 years old when this happened. I was sleeping over my grandma's house for the weekend, which I often did when I was little. It was a stormy day out, and my grandma was out at the nearby grocery store getting ingredients for dinner. I was in the living room watching SpongeBob when the phone rang. There was obviously zero reason for me to answer the phone, but you know, I was a little kid with a little kid brain. There's no explaining any decisions made. I went to the kitchen and picked up the phone, and after my little kid voice said hello into the phone, the man's voice on the other end said, "Can I speak to the adult in the house?" I said, "She's not home," and the voice responded, "So you're all alone right now?" I remember I paused for a second, then said, "Yeah." Even at my age, I knew after he asked that it probably wasn't a good idea to have picked up the phone. The person on the other end then asked if the current address he had on file was correct, but I didn't answer that. I hung up the phone, and now I was nervous. I was worried I might have just gotten my grandma in trouble. Nonetheless, I went back to watching SpongeBob. 20 minutes later or so, there was a frantic knocking at the door. I muted the TV and listened. Along with the knocking, someone on the other end cried out, "Please help." It was a man. I snuck over to the edge of the wall where the opening for the front door was to take a peek and see if I saw anyone standing on the other side of the door through the glass at the top of the door. That was a mistake, because I did, and they saw me too. The man on the other side of the door immediately said, "Little boy, please open the door, I'm hurt bad." I ran to the corner of the room by the window and closed the blinds so I could hide behind the couch. I was so scared. There were no cell phones back then, I couldn't call my grandma. The man kept pounding on the door, his cries for help turning more annoyed sounding, and his knocks got louder and more frequent. Then the pounds on the door stopped, and he started knocking on the window right next to me. The creep started saying things like, "I'm not gonna hurt you," and "Please, I'm bleeding bad." I started to cry in the corner, still hiding behind the couch. The pounding stopped finally, and after a minute, I ran to my grandma's room and locked the door. I laid in her bed under the covers with only my head sticking out. The rain hitting the windowsill and the occasional distant thunder was weirdly calming, at least for a little bit. The man on the other side appeared at one of the windows and started trying to lift it open. Thank God all the windows were locked. Now I hid under the covers completely, and I don't think he saw me in there. This was the last time I saw or heard that man. 20 minutes later, I heard my grandma come in through the front door. I ran into her arms, crying and apologizing, and told her everything. She of course called the police, and when the officers needed me to give whatever details I could, my grandma called me into the room and I answered their questions. Then she sent me back off to the guest bedroom to watch TV. Unfortunately, that man was never caught, for this at least. My grandma never told my parents, and she told me not to tell them either, but she also never left me alone again anytime I slept over after that, which wasn't many times. Long story short, I was one unlocked door away from undoubtedly being kidnapped. I'm a father of 2 kids. They're 15 and 10. My wife was out of the house at the time of this happening. I was in my room taking a nap in the middle of the day. My older son is always in and out all day, every day with his friends. So when I heard the front door constantly opening and closing, it didn't concern me. But eventually, when I heard the storm door slam shut for a 4th time, I started to get annoyed and whistled at him to quiet down. I started hearing other loud noises from across the hallway, in the direction of my younger son Keith's room. I imagined he was playing with his wrestling toys or something. Regardless, even with my door shut, the noise got to be too much. It was just like a constant thumping sound. Like, what could Keith possibly be doing? When I went across the hall to his room, the noise became more clear, and it was this literal thumping on the wall sound. I went into his room. The door was already opened. I said Keith's name angrily, but I didn't see my son. I saw some grown man facing the wall, banging his head into the wall. There was blood on the wall from his constant banging. The man gave me a side glance without turning his whole head. I managed to tackle the man to the floor, and that's when Keith emerged from under his sheets where he was hiding. The man didn't fight back. He started yelling this psychotic mumbo-jumbo, proving his lacking sanity. I told Keith to go get the house phone while I held the man down. After calling the police, I was in that same position for at least 5 minutes before they arrived. The man just kept smiling and laughing and saying things that made no sense the entire time. The man was ill or on some serious drugs, or both. I didn't press charges, and I'm sure he was taken somewhere to get the help he clearly needed and to get him off the streets. I've had many night terrors in my life, and I've struggled with many sleeping disorders. Hell, I can't even count how many times I've experienced sleep paralysis. It's a truly disturbing thing. I've also woken to seeing spiders and other giant bugs in my bed countless times, for them to only disappear as I start to snap back to reality. But the hallucinations are always so real and vivid. I always find myself jumping out of my bed screaming, throwing pillows at the non-existent bugs. And don't even get me started on the constant nightmares I have. There was one stressful week of school that I was up to my ears in homework with all my classes, and I was admittedly exhausted mentally and physically. With half of my assignments due the next day, which was Friday, I was up extremely late for a school night. It had to be like 3 a.m., and I had to be up in 3 hours. When I finally finished all of my assignments, I literally crashed into bed, and I was out cold faster than I could remember. And that night, I was having a bad dream again. The best I could describe this bizarre dream, I was for some reason in this linear building that I was trying to escape, and in each passing room I kept finding candies, like it was a Halloween attraction or something. But in the dream I was running away from something, and the something I was running away from kept laughing. It was a child's laughter, and it sounded like it was coming from everywhere. What caused me to wake up was when I made it to what was presumed to be the final door of the building. The laughing was the loudest now, and when I opened the door, I woke up in my bed. I couldn't move. It was happening again. Then there was a laughter from the middle of the room. I moved my eyes to focus to the middle of the room. There were 4 people standing in the center of the room. It was like a family, a tall male and female, and then a small boy and girl. They were all holding hands and they were all laughing, looking at me with giant grins on their faces, impossibly wide grins. And as I felt this tight pressure in my chest, which is common in sleep paralysis, I started to feel like they were getting bigger, or just getting closer, like they were all floating towards me. When my body finally permitted, I threw the sheets off of me and threw my pillows into the middle of the room and screamed. But the pillows hid nothing, as the 4 figures were gone, and the horrible laughing had stopped. I had never experienced a hallucination like that, and I have had sleep paralysis many times. I had to see my doctor the next day, who prescribed me new medication. Since then, I've still had my share of night terrors, but nothing even close to that. It was a Friday or a Saturday night. I was pre-gaming with some friends at my apartment before going out to a bar in town. One of my friends called the Uber, and we were all pretty drunk, laughing and being loud with typical drunken banter. We got to the bar, and no line that night, surprisingly. At some point in the night, I asked for a girl's number who I'd been talking to. When I went into my pocket to get my phone, I realized I didn't have it on me. I checked all my pockets and confirmed this. I tried retracing my steps in the bar and asked each bartender if someone turned in a phone. I didn't remember even using my phone the whole time I'd been out, though. I stepped outside the bar with one of my friends to use his phone to call mine. Someone picked up on the other end. I heard the fiddling of the phone, but they didn't say anything. I said, "Hi, where'd you find this phone?" Just breathing on the other end. I asked them if they were at the bar, but they hung up on me. I looked at my friend and tried calling again. Went straight to voicemail, though. I tried using Find My iPhone, but apparently I had that feature switched off for some reason. This was a pretty sobering experience. There was no way I could have fun knowing my phone was stolen. My friends told me just worry about it tomorrow, go to the police station and get their help in tracking it. I went home early that night. I put a couple slices of bread in the toaster before bed, and found my phone on the kitchen counter. It didn't make sense. I signed into it and checked my recent calls, and indeed, someone accepted the call, and it lasted for 25 seconds. Someone had been in my apartment to accept the call, that much was clear. I flipped the place upside down looking, screaming for whoever it was to come out from where they were hiding. Of course, this had a lot to do with the liquid confidence from drinking so much that night. I finally called the cops, but considering there was no real proof of any forced entry, and places to hide are basically non-existent in this apartment, they couldn't do anything besides a police report. Nothing seemed to be missing from my apartment, but going to sleep that night, knowing someone had been in my apartment, or even worse, might possibly have still been in there with me, was probably the most uncomfortable night of my life. I was 17 years old, and this happened on a late summer night. My dad and little brother had gone to a Boy Scout campout. My dad was one of the Scoutmasters. I was home alone with my mom for the weekend. She was already in bed at this point. It was about 2 in the morning, and I was just finishing up my late night gaming. I had to go to the bathroom one more time before going to sleep though. While sitting on the toilet playing games on my phone, I heard the faintest little tap on the bathroom door. "Mom, was that you?" "Mom," I yelled. It wasn't windy or anything. There didn't seem to be any logical way to dismiss it. I slowly and nervously opened the door, but there was nobody there. However, my bedroom door was now shut. I was certain I hadn't shut it. I went over to my mom's room and told her that I thought somebody was in my room. She didn't take me seriously and told me that she didn't know what to tell me. I tried to convince myself that maybe I did shut my door. I opened my door feeling extremely freaked out, and when I snuck a peek into the room, I felt like my heart exploded inside of my chest. I could see a hand sticking out from behind the dresser in the corner of my room. Somebody was hiding there. I ran to my mom's room and locked the door behind me. After quietly freaking out, telling her there's a man in the house, she finally believed me and went straight to my phone to call the cops. I put my ear up against the door to try and hear anything going on outside. I eventually heard the man's footsteps come out from my room and slowly come closer to my mom's room until making it right outside the door, then stopping. I could see the outlines of his shoes through the bottom crack of the door. He tried the doorknob, but thankfully it had a lock. It seemed the lock was enough to persuade him to give up, because I heard him stomp down the stairs and out the front door. I hurried to the window to see which way the man was heading, but he was already gone. When I was younger, 10 years old at the time, my mom had just started letting me stay home alone. We had been watching my mom's friend's dog while they were on vacation. My mom worked weeknights, so she told me that they would come around back since the dog's cage was right next to the back door, and that I would have to let them in. I sat in the den by the back door, with the dog by my side while I watched TV. He then started to growl and bark, while looking out the window to the dark. I tried to see what he was barking at, but it was too dark. Of course, I assumed it was my mom's friend coming to pick up the dog. I went over to the door with the dog following me and turned on the patio light. I couldn't see anyone out there at first, but the dog was still barking. I made sure to peek at every corner of the yard, but then I saw someone at the garden by our shed. It looked like my mom's friend. They seemed to be bending over, picking something up. I assumed she was admiring my mom's garden or something logical. I then received a disturbing phone call. I prioritized answering the phone, as my mom was strict about me always answering the phone when I was home alone. I left the dog to continue barking by the door as I picked up the phone, hoping it was my mom. And it was. She told me that her friend wasn't going to pick up the dog that night, as they wouldn't be getting home until past midnight. I began to stutter as the pure horror prohibited me from speaking coherently. I managed to finally blurt out that someone was in our yard, and my mom started screaming like a lunatic. She told me to get up to my room, lock the door, and hide under the bed while my mom called the cops. I obeyed and laid there in silence for a good 10 minutes, until I got a knock at the door. I sprang up and out of the room, making it halfway down the stairs, when I saw a face looking in through the window of our front door. This face, a guy, staring right at me. A face so unsettling that it disturbs me thinking of it today. I screamed at the guy that the police were on their way, but he didn't move. He insisted on just staring at me like a statue. I ran all the way back upstairs, tripping twice, and back to my room. I waited another few minutes before another knock came at the door, followed by a muffled shouting noise. It was the police this time. They scanned the whole premises, but the guy was gone. They took me into custody until my mom arrived at the station. After that incident, she started having a babysitter watch me again, all the way until I was 12. A long time ago, my girlfriend and I were looking for a private place to be alone together since our parents were always home. There was a vacant house on the corner of our block that hadn't been owned for years. The back door was always left unlocked. I would know because my friends and I had been in there before. We went in through the back, but before we could even get upstairs, there was a knock at the front door. We looked at each other with worry. What if someone had caught us sneaking in? She peeked out the window, but there was no one on the stoop. She made sure that the door was locked before turning back to me. I assured her it was just some kids playing ding-dong ditch. We made it only halfway up the stairs before the frantic knocking on the door came back. She checked the window again. The porch was still empty. She opened the door this time and still couldn't see anyone. I wanted to look tough to impress her, so I stepped outside and yelled at the pranksters to try it again. I shut the door and waited behind it, hands on the doorknob, ready to throw the door open. I just waited there for at least a minute, and I was about to just forget about it when I heard the blood-curdling scream of my girlfriend. I turned to see what she was screaming at, and I screamed as well. Just barely in the dark, we could see the silhouette of a huge humanoid figure very slowly making its way down the stairs. It was moving in a hovering-like motion. We ran past it just in arm's reach and left the house the way we came. We ran all the way back to my house, both of us out of breath. We know it couldn't have been an old person. They had to be at least 7 feet tall. Nobody was supposed to be living in that house, though. I even asked a friend living across the street from the house, and he said it had been vacant for years. The ghostly way the figure moved made it all the more disturbing. We both agreed to keep quiet about this story, but I still occasionally have a nightmare or bad thoughts about that night. My dad always loved going crazy with the Christmas lights when I was young. He was an overachiever with it, and always had to have the most impressive display on the block. The year of 2010 was no exception. He set the lights up on timers so that they'd flash along to certain Christmas songs, which was becoming a popular trend in 2010. We had a bunch of onlookers and people stop by and take videos. My dad always ate that up. This was on a night where there was a light snowfall, and it was below freezing out, so not the weather a lot of onlookers would want to come and check out the display. There were a couple that we noticed, a woman and then a man. The woman left after a few minutes. The man stayed and admired it. We saw a smile on his face. He stayed for quite some time actually, and I knew my dad loved that. Eventually it got late, and it started snowing a little heavier. So my dad pulled the plug on the lights for the night. Quite literally pulled the plug. The lights and music outside stopped, and on that note, that meant the night was approaching its end. Everyone went upstairs to shower or brush their teeth or do whatever they had to do. I went to my room upstairs and looked out the window, as a curiosity thing to see how many people still had their lights on at this hour. Only a couple houses. But I picked up on more than just that. That man who was admiring the lights was still outside on the sidewalk facing the house, even though all the lights were now off. I called my dad over, a bit confused and concerned. He came to the window with me and looked out. "What do you think he's doing?" I asked. "I don't know," my dad said. We both assumed the guy might be waiting for the lights to turn back on. Either that or he may be loony, or both. My dad said just lower the blinds and ignore it, he'll go away eventually. I brushed my teeth, got some water, then turned off my light and climbed into bed. I heard the little flakes of snow tapping on the window, a sound I always found very relaxing, but I wasn't relaxed. I was wide awake and curious. I had to look out my window. I pulled the blind up just a little to sneak a peek outside. The man was gone, but I could see footprints in the snow on our front lawn, which started from the sidewalk. Curiosity got the best of me. I tiptoed downstairs to the front door, which has 3 square glass windows at the top of it. I peeked through that glass, and I wish I hadn't. He was standing on the other side of the door, looking at the glass window, a big smile on his face, accentuating his crow's feet and smile lines. He had a mustache and was wearing one of those old-time wool caps and a large black coat. He had a look of crazy in his eye. For that brief couple of seconds I looked at him before falling back screaming. Everyone came out of their rooms in response to my screams. I pulled the front door open for my dad to see. The man wasn't on the stoop anymore, but we saw him quickly walking across the street into the park. My dad, brother, and I all rushed to put on our shoes, skipping the coats so to not waste time. We chased after him by following his footprints into the park. I was so cold it felt like thousands of icicles were stabbing my body. We got across the street to the park and went into the trees, but following the footprints got harder under the trees as less snow had accumulated, until there was not enough snow at all to even leave footprints in. We had to give up and run back home to warmth. Technically, we don't know if that man did anything illegal, just downright disturbing and creepy. Maybe he was messing with my family, maybe he was mentally ill. None of these questions will ever be answered, though. I was on my way home from working a graveyard shift on Christmas Eve night. It was a snowy night. The roads were icy and slippery. I was driving slow and cautious, listening to Christmas music. There were next to no cars on the road at all, just the occasional snowplow truck. I was on a quiet service road when I came to a red light. There were 2 cars in front of me. The light quickly turned green, but the cars didn't move. I'm not the type to honk, if ever, but after 30 seconds of neither of the cars moving, I finally tapped on the horn. Still nothing. The car in front of me wasn't even honking at the car in front of him. Another 20 seconds passed, and I honked again. I noticed someone on the sidewalk watching this happen. I thought he must be thinking, what an asshole, whoever's in the front car. We were sitting there so long now that the light changed to red again. Like I said, I'm not the type to honk, so I'm definitely not the type to get out of my car and confront someone. But this was too much. I was exhausted and wanted to go home. I got out from my car and walked over to the car in front of me, which for the record was still on. Both of them were. When I knocked on the window, I looked inside. The car was empty. I walked to the car in front of it, and it was empty too. There was no way to explain this. 2 running cars blocking a lane. No one inside either of them. No signs of an accident or anything. I was ready to ask that guy on the sidewalk if one of these cars were his, but when I looked in the direction where he was standing, he wasn't there anymore. The light turned green. Okay, whatever. I was gonna drive around them on the opposite side of the road and be gone. So that's what I did. I was way too unsettled to stick around there. A few blocks down, I saw a cop car parked in an empty parking lot. Unfortunately, I missed the entrance, so I started honking my horn and flashing my lights to get his attention, and it worked. He turned his car on and exited the parking lot to pull up behind me on the road. It felt like he was pulling me over, kind of, because he exited his car to walk up to mine. I didn't leave my car as a respect thing, I guess. I lowered my window and told him about the 2 weird abandoned cars back there and how they were obstructing traffic. He thanked me and said he'd check it out. Then his attention turned to something in the back seat, and he said, "Why is he laying on the floor like that?" "What?" I said. I turned around and saw a hooded man laying on the floor of my car. I screamed in front of the cop. I stepped out and yelled at the cop that I didn't know him. The cop drew his gun and ordered the guy to step out with his hands raised. He did so. When the man was in handcuffs, I recognized him as the guy standing on the side of the road. So I told the cop. The cop called for backup. He shook my hand and told me he'd take care of the rest, and to get home safe, and we wished each other a Merry Christmas. I drove home with a mix of emotions, but that Christmas, all I know is I had a newfound appreciation for police officers. My wife and I live in a duplex in Queens, New York. Last month, 2 upper middle-aged women moved in next door. We never had the chance to greet them the first few days. They seemed very quickly in and out at first. On, say, the 4th day, I caught one of the women carrying a box from her car into her side of the house, so I walked out to finally greet her. Her name is Frances, and she seemed normal enough, but she also seemed like she was in a hurry, so I didn't steal too much of her time. The next day was Christmas Eve, so my wife and I were preparing to host my sister and their families. During our Christmas Eve dinner, which was going completely normal, we all went silent and looked at the door when we all heard the sound of someone trying to push open the locked door. I got up and opened the door to see who it was. By the time I opened the door, there was no one on the stoop, but there was this woman walking down the sidewalk. I began to call out, but stopped mid-first word, deciding not to even bother. Maybe she had the wrong house, and that's what I said to my family when I sat down. Wrong house. My family all left around 9 that night. After that, the wife and I began our cleanup. I was mid-washing dishes when the front door opened and then shut pretty aggressively. In my head, it could have been my wife or any of my sisters returning because they forgot something. When I called for my wife and she answered from a different room, I knew it wasn't her. So I turned off the sink, dried my hands, and walked into the living room. There was a woman sitting in my big recliner chair in the corner. She was looking at the wall, muttering something to herself. I recognized her to be one of the women from next door. My wife entered the room and gasped. I calmly told the woman she was on the wrong side of the house. Then she looked at me and continued muttering inaudible words. There was clearly some form of dementia. I told my wife to go hurry and knock on the neighbor's door. My wife left and was back with Frances surprisingly quickly. Frances seemed very relieved and grabbed the woman by the arm and pulled her off the chair and out of the house to their side. Frances came back a minute later to apologize and explain that her sister has what's known as sundowning syndrome, a form of dementia in which the symptoms get worse as the day goes on. I asked a question I felt rather important, which was, does she get aggressive at all in this state? I didn't like her answer. She said it's just best to leave her alone later in the day when she starts acting up. I wasn't overly friendly considering I was pretty taken aback by what just happened, but I wasn't rude either. Frances left, and my wife and I just looked at each other with these what the hell just happened looks on our faces. Anyway, this time I remembered to lock the door. The next day we went to my wife's parents' house for Christmas dinner. It was a nice time. We got home late since they live about an hour away, so I'd say we got home around 11. We cuddled up in bed and watched whatever Christmas movie was still on at that point. After that, our Christmas was over, and we cut the TV and went to sleep. My eyes opened to a dark room. I sensed I had been woken up by a noise. I looked around the room and spotted her walking out of the room and into the hall. "Honey, are you okay?" "Huh?" I heard next to me in a groggy, half-asleep voice. My wife was still laying next to me in the bed. I leaped out of bed, looked down the hall, and saw the tall, lanky figure of who I could only assume to be that woman from next door. She noticed me in the doorway. I yelled wrong house before slamming the bedroom door shut and locking it. I heard her march down the hall back to our door and try opening it. She tried pushing and shoving the door, making these weird, angry noises. I called the police and said our new neighbor with dementia had broken in and might possibly be violent. I requested they ring the neighboring door to wake up Frances and get her to come in here. Waiting for the police was a miserable, nail-biting experience. When they finally did come, I left our room and went to the front door to let them in. Frances came in with the police, extremely worried and apologetic. Her sister was walking around in our basement, all confused-like. Frances took her back to the other side once again, then came back out to talk with the police and I. She expressed sincere sorrow and gratitude for me not hurting her. I told her firmly this was not okay, and warned if this happened again that I would consider pressing charges. From that point on, we obviously locked everything, including windows. Francis's sister eventually went to go live with their mother instead. Thank God for us. As a father of two, Christmas is already a stressful time of year for me. 2 Christmases ago, my kids were still in love with the idea of Santa Claus. After watching the Polar Express as a family, my wife tucked the kids into bed and she started putting the presents under the tree. I didn't really do any of that stuff. I just laid in bed watching something on TV, waiting for her to come up. By the time she was done, we were ready for bed. We're early birds when it comes to sleep. I'm also a pretty good sleeper. I'm lucky enough to be able to knock out within a few minutes. And waking up in the middle of the night is unusual for me, which is why I was confused at first when I woke up that night. Then I realized why. My daughter Kelsey was in the room, saying "Daddy" over and over. I rubbed my eyes and asked her what's wrong. She had this cute little happy smile on her face as she said, "Santa's here." I smiled back at her, saying, "Yes, he is." I told her she better be quiet and hurry back to her room so that Santa doesn't find out she's awake. She giggled and said okay, and walked out of my room, leaving the door open. I laid back down and tried to get back to sleep. A couple minutes later, I heard some shuffling around downstairs. I sighed because I knew Kelsey probably went down there to open her presents early, which is what she did the year before. I reluctantly got up and walked towards the stairs. As I started clomping down the stairs, the noises I was hearing ceased. I got to the bottom step and I was in the living room by the tree. The lights on the tree were still on, I guess because it was Christmas Eve night. All the presents seemed to still be there, so Kelsey wasn't going through them after all. Still, I walked around the living room and dining room whispering her name just to see if she was hiding somewhere. I gave up and went back up the stairs. I was about to go to my wife and I's room when I decided I'd step into Kelsey's room just to check if she was in there. And she was. She was sitting up in her bed, wide awake. I asked her why she went downstairs when I told her to go to bed. She whispered excitedly, "It wasn't me, Santa's down there." I tried to begin a sentence, but stuttered, then froze. I ran down the stairs and turned on the lights, looking around the whole house. Then I found that the back door was open. Nobody locked it. Someone had broken into our house on Christmas Eve night, right under our noses, and stole a few of the presents left under the tree, according to my wife. The worst part about this is I heard whoever was down there. In fact, my 7-year-old daughter did too. Hell, she even came into my room and basically gave me a warning. It still kills me to this day. I'm 30 years old, and I share a house with my sister. It's a 2-floor house, a mother-daughter house, meaning it has 2 kitchens. My sister takes the downstairs, I take the upstairs. My sister isn't home a lot because she often stays with her boyfriend who lives 20 miles away. Like I said, I'm 30. I shouldn't let being home alone ever freak me out. But, admittedly, sometimes it does. This happened on a night that I was home alone in my living room watching a scary movie. My part of the house is an open layout, so the living room, dining room, and kitchen are all one big space. My couch is in the middle of the space, so as I watch TV on the couch, my back is to a large part of the room behind me. So for those a little more easily spooked, it wouldn't be the most comfortable place to be sitting alone watching a scary movie. I'll admit, as I watched in the dark room with nothing but the light from the TV to cancel the darkness of the room, I found myself glancing over my shoulder a lot. I like to think I'm not the only 30-year-old male that does that. But anyway, after the movie, I brushed my teeth, turned off all the lights in the house, then went to sleep. My sleep lasted for about 2 hours. I woke up around 1 a.m., and I wasn't sure why I woke up at first. Then I heard a voice downstairs. It sounded like my sister. It sounded like she was inside the house, so it's not like she was calling for me to open the door. But still, I knew it was my sister's voice. I didn't know what she was yelling up to me though, but I was still groggy and not thinking straight. All I could think was that she must have been calling for me, or arguing with her boyfriend. So I got out of bed and went into the pitch black hall. I turned on the hallway lights and then made my way through the living room and heard my sister's voice again from downstairs. Now I could understand her to be saying my name. I made my way downstairs in the dark, yelling back at her, "What is it?" I looked for the light switch in the foyer downstairs, but couldn't find it. I'm not lying when I say I was groggy as hell. I walked down her little hallway towards her kitchen, find a light switch, and flick it on. The light in the kitchen lights up her little apartment, including her living room. The light starts off dim and needs time to brighten up, but I still saw that there was no one down there. Not her, not her boyfriend. I went to her bedroom, but it was empty. I called her name really loudly one time. No one called back, but shortly after I yelled, I heard something drop to the floor in my sister's bedroom, which I had just checked, and it was empty. I went back up the stairs like a little kid and went back to my bed to where my phone was. I tried to call her a few times, but she didn't pick up. I had myself locked in my room, wondering if I had just hallucinated all of that. Eventually I fell asleep, and in the morning I woke up to text from my sister asking why I called her at 1 a.m. I asked her if she was home last night, and she told me no, she was currently staying at her boyfriend's house. I went downstairs to her bedroom to see what may have fallen down on the floor, but there was not a single object on the floor that could have made that noise. I'm led to believe I hallucinated everything I heard that night, but that's what I want to believe, because the alternative would be much more horrific. But I've never really hallucinated anything else, or had any kind of sleep disorders, so how vividly I heard my sister's voice, and that sound in her room, really freaks me out. I was left home alone a lot as a kid, just due to the fact that my mom was single for a good chunk of my upbringing, and she worked as an RN on a crappy RN schedule, and my brother went away to college. This was a night that my mom was working an overnight. It was a weekend night, so I had this girl Molly over who I was talking to, and she hung out for a while. We watched a couple movies and whatnot, and eventually she had to go home because her parents don't like her out late, so I was left alone to hold down the fort. I continued to watch TV in my room and bed. My bedroom is upstairs next to the backyard, so when someone dragged one of the chairs on the deck outside, I heard it. I got up and looked out the window, and I saw someone sitting on one of the deck chairs down below. I called Molly's name thinking it was her. After all, she'd only left under 10 minutes ago. Whoever it was looked up at me, but it wasn't Molly. I immediately pulled away from the window to hide. That was not anybody I recognized. Not in the darkness, at least. I texted a few close friends in our group chat if it was one of them messing with me. The ones who answered all said no, and asked what I was talking about. I didn't really believe any of my friends would come to my house to mess with me like that anyway. Scared shitless, but still curious, I slowly walked back over to the window to look down again, and that person was still sitting in the chair, looking up at my window. It was a he, that much was clear, and he definitely saw me. I hurried away from the window again to turn off the TV. I sat in my bed in a ball basically, with my arms wrapped around my knees. I waited in darkness for a while. I didn't even want to turn my phone screen on because I was scared he'd see the light. I didn't even want to move because the window was opened and I feared that he'd hear any movement I made. I wanted him to assume I was just no longer in the bedroom. I waited enough time. It had to be a solid 5 minutes of just sitting there. I highly doubted that man outside could still be there. I finally mustered up the courage to get up and look out the window. I felt a little part of me die inside when I saw he was still down there, looking up at my window. Instead of running away from the window again, I tried to be brave and said down to him, "What do you want?" I then noticed his shoulders started to go up and down as if he were laughing really hard, but he didn't make any kind of audible laughing sounds at first, till I heard a slight whistling sound coming from him. It seemed like he was laughing so hard that he was wheezing. I asked him to please go away, then walked away from the window again. I went back to my bed. I was scared to call the police for some reason. I left my room and sat at the top of the stairway listening. The back door was being pushed. He was trying to get into the house. I ran back to my room to hide again. I was 14, I didn't know what else to do. Eventually I heard the front door's doorknob being fiddled with, and the man trying to push the front door open as well. He gave up quickly, thank God. I closed my bedroom window and curtains. If our doors weren't locked, I could have been killed easily. I was skinny and weak when I was 14 and definitely not a fighter. I didn't leave my room again that night until my mom got home around 9. I told her what happened, and her reaction was angry at me for not calling 911, and in hindsight, that was very stupid of me. One of the many things I did, or rather didn't do at a young age, that I question greatly. This was the story of how I almost died as a young kid, home alone, and possibly the most intense night of my life with way too much going on. We're a family of 5. I was 10 at the time. My older brother was 14, my little sister was 5. It was a Friday night. My brother was out with his friends causing trouble, clearly, because a dreaded phone call came to my parents. All I remember was I was in my room playing a Star Wars video game when I heard my mom start freaking out crying. I got really scared and hurried to see what was wrong. My mom was on the phone with the hospital, calling to inform my parents that my brother had gotten hit by a car. Obviously, we were all shaken and really scared. My brother's leg was broken, but I don't know what else was said on the phone. All I know is my parents hurried to get their coats on and got my little sister from her room and asked me if I was okay to stay home alone. I said yes, and they hurried out to the car and left. I was of course really worried for my brother, but I really didn't want to go to the hospital and see him in any kind of bad condition. I don't think my parents wanted me or my sister to either, but they didn't want to leave my 5-year-old sister home without them. It's worth mentioning my brother recovered just fine, as his injury is no longer relevant to the story, other than it being the reason why I was left home alone on a Friday night. Before my dad left, he was trying to calm down my mom, telling her he was going to be okay. So seeing my dad like that made me feel better. I had a feeling my mom was just being overdramatic like any mom would be. I continued playing the Star Wars game for a couple more hours when I heard the front door open. I had my bedroom door closed. By this point, it was easily past midnight and past my bedtime, so I turned off the TV and PlayStation and crawled into my bed with my Game Boy. I tried listening to hear my parents' voices, maybe hear if my brother was with them or just hear what they were saying, but I didn't hear anything. After a few minutes of not hearing them even come up the stairs, I had a feeling something was wrong. I went to my door and quietly opened it, then walked over to the ledge and banister that overlooked the living room. The lights were off, but there were 3 tall people standing in my living room. They weren't my family. I was so petrified that I was frozen for a second before I could quietly walk back into my room and shut the door as quietly as I could in my trepidation. But it wasn't quiet enough, and I knew it. They had to have heard the door click shut, even if just slightly. I hurried to my closet door, opened it quietly, stepped inside, then shut the door. I had myself sitting behind a bunch of the boxes and bags of clothes that were stuffed in my closet. I was actually pretty covered from view. There was this short period that felt like forever that I was anticipating my bedroom door open, and it did. And at that moment, I knew I was going to die. I heard footsteps walk into the room. I couldn't tell how many people. It may have been 1, it may have been 2. I heard the footsteps move to my bed. Then I heard my covers being played with. Then silence. Then more footsteps towards the closet door. Then silence for a few seconds. And then the closet door opened. My heart was in my throat by this point. All I did was sit quietly and hold my breath. The door was open for a really long time, but I didn't look up. I didn't move. It had to be a good 20 seconds of silence before the door closed again. Footsteps walked away from the door, then out of the room. I finally looked up, and I just realized, from where I was crouched down behind the bags and boxes, I may have been visible to that person. It wasn't until probably an hour that I heard my parents return. I ran downstairs to them. The front door was left ajar by the people who broke in, and they had stolen a number of valuables from our house. It was a night that just went from bad to worse for our family. My parents were in such a rush when they left for the hospital that they apparently didn't even lock the door. I was lucky to have not been killed or kidnapped. I look back now and really wonder if the person who opened the closet and just stood there for 20 seconds saw me hiding in there. Maybe he was just a guy that came to rob a house, not to kidnap or hurt a child. Or maybe he just didn't see me, and I just narrowly escaped death or injury. I was home alone for an entire week one time when I was still a teenager living with my parents, which was a rare occasion since my parents don't go out a lot. My mom's rich friend Patty invited my parents on a trip that she was paying for. I'm an only child, so I was left alone in the house. We lived in Newark, Ohio, which is in Licking County. Yes, our county was actually called Licking County. My parents' old house had woods in the backyard and was on some quiet road that only a few cars would pass per day usually. We had a huge deck in the backyard overlooking the woods and a decently large backyard. We even had a little fish pond and above-ground swimming pool. This was on a Thursday night. I remember because I had conversations with friends about plans for the weekend that day. This was in July of 2013. I was out on the deck smoking weed with my speaker playing music. That's about the time it started. I thought I heard a voice from out in the woods. I lowered the music and listened for a little bit. It didn't repeat, so I raised it back up. When the music was loud again, I heard a voice from out in the woods again. This time I turned the music off completely and listened for longer. There was a voice calling from the woods again, confirming I wasn't just hearing things. It was a male's voice, saying, "Hey, over here." It was kind of distant, but not too far. The woods were anywhere from 20 to 30 yards away from the deck, and that's where the voice was coming from. I didn't think in a million years it was someone calling out for me though, rather maybe just some kids playing manhunt or something. The voice called out again, "Hey, over here, we need help." This time I realized the voice was too deep to be a kid, and when a voice yells out "we need help," obviously that'll always be slightly concerning. I was getting a little bit uncomfortable now, because now I was questioning if these yells were directed at me. Now I heard the voice yell, "Straight in front of you, please come help us." And the voice was coming from straight in front of me in the woods. Now I had a feeling this was directed at me. I reluctantly called back, "Who is that?" And they responded, "We just need help, we're stuck in the woods." I called back, "What does that mean?" And the voice replied back, "Just please come help, straight in front of you." I got out from my seat, walked down the steps of the deck onto the grass, and proceeded towards the woods. I called out, "I'm coming, where are you?" The voice replied instantly, "Right in front of you, I see you." I replied back, "Wait, are you alone or with someone?" There was no answer this time. I stopped in my tracks about halfway towards the woods. I had a bad feeling in my gut about this. I started walking backwards, back towards the house and the deck. I didn't even want to turn my back to the woods, because it took me that long to realize there was something very suspicious about this situation. I made it back to the deck, and the voice didn't say anything else. If they truly saw me and this was real, they would have said something like, "Where are you going?" at the very least. They knew I was onto the situation, but who even knows how many people were in there? Could have been one, could have been three. All I know is getting stuck in the woods makes absolutely no sense, especially if he or they were able to literally see me. Like what? Did their shirt get caught on a branch? I went inside the house and locked all the doors just to be safe. I chilled in my living room for a bit, still high, and I think that's why I was more trusting at first, because of how high and relaxed I was. Then though, I heard the voice again from outside, closer now, definitely in the backyard and not the woods anymore. I heard splashing of water. It could have been the pool or the pond. I hurried to the window to see. I didn't see anyone at first, but then the voice called, "I see you," with a laugh. I noticed him. It was one guy, at least one guy visible. He was hidden behind the pool on the other side, and I could only see his head. It was just too dark to make out anything besides his dark, medium-length hair. I closed the blinds and tried to ignore it. Maybe he'd lose interest if he saw I wasn't entertaining him. He was probably a sick, deranged person who enjoyed messing with people, so I didn't want to give him what he wanted. But my breaking point was when there was a horrible, aggressive banging on the window where I had just closed the blinds, and on the other side, the guy was screaming help. I screamed at the top of my lungs to "Fuck off, you freak, the police are coming." I screamed it over and over, trying to make myself sound crazier than him. I heard him start to laugh on the other side of the glass. His laughing started to fade away as I assume he walked away. I sat back down on the couch, trembling, shaking, out of breath. I sat there for a while, and it seemed like the guy had really given up. I still got a good night's sleep that night because weed helps me sleep. I wonder if I would have handled that situation any differently if I wasn't high though. The situation made me more paranoid about who I opened my door to. I'm 23 years old, and I live at home with my parents still. One day they were both not home, and I was outside playing basketball in the front yard. At some point while I was playing, I looked up at one of our upstairs windows and saw a woman standing there. Not my mom, not my sister. It was a random woman. I guess when she saw me looking at her, she dipped away from the window. When I went inside and upstairs to check the lounge room, she wasn't anywhere. I checked every single room I could, every bedroom, the bathroom, every closet. Then I checked the downstairs, which included the living room, kitchen, dining room, one bedroom, and more closets. Finally, I checked the basement, and I highly doubted she could be down there. It's a small basement with a couple couches, a bar, and 2 closets. There weren't many places for someone to hide, but when I opened the second closet door, I was incredibly scared, as I didn't know of any other places someone could be hiding in the house. This was the last unchecked spot that I could think of. I yanked the door open as if I were ripping off a band-aid, and like I did with the closet before this one, I right away pushed myself into the closet just in case that woman was in there and I'd have to jump on her. But all I pushed myself into was a bunch of coats and coat hangers. I was so confused. I wasn't going to question my sanity though. I definitely saw that woman and I knew it. It wasn't the kind of thing you would just so vividly imagine. I went back to the middle floor and screamed very loud that whoever was in the house needs to get the F out. I actually screamed so loud that our next door neighbor came over and asked if I was okay. I told him that I literally just saw a woman at our upstairs window watching me play basketball. He came in and helped me search again. When we couldn't find her, I was left to assume that she snuck out through the back door, which I did unlock after all when I went to grab the basketball from the yard. So my neighbor left. I locked all the doors, called my parents, and told them the crazy story, and they weren't too thrilled. But they asked me to make sure nothing was stolen. I did just that, and luckily it seemed anything that was worth something was still in place. So now fast forward to that night. I went to sleep after checking the house one more time just for peace of mind. It was hard to fall asleep though. My mind was racing for obvious reasons. Most people can't relate to seeing a stranger at their window inside of their house. But my restlessness helped me out in this situation, and here's why. I was finally starting to drift away slightly. Then I heard some noises from the other side of me. I had the fan on above me, so the room wasn't dead silent, and that's why I didn't immediately turn to my other side at the first sound I heard. But the sound started to sound human-like. I turned to my other side, and there she was, getting out from under my bed. She stood up tall above the bed, and I screamed so loud, louder than earlier before. I jumped out of my bed and tackled her to the floor and had my hand around her throat, asking her who she was. My doorbell rang, my neighbor again. I picked the tall, dirty-looking woman up off the floor and dragged her to the front door with me as she struggled and scratched at me. I still have 2 scars on my right arm from her claws. I opened my front door to my neighbor again, and he let himself in and helped me restrain the woman. This was when I called the police. The whole time we waited for the police, the woman was screaming and cursing at my neighbor and I, threatening us too. The best way to put it, she looked and acted like a meth head currently suffering from withdrawals. When the police arrived, one of the officers knew exactly who the woman was. They had dealt with her multiple times before. Her name was conveniently Karen. It was satisfying to watch her be brought into the back of the police car. I let my neighbor know how grateful I was for him coming so quickly to help. And that night, my mind continued to race. But instead of being completely freaked out, which I still was a little, I felt this overwhelming feeling of satisfaction. and I can't fully explain why. A lot of you mentioned that you'd like to hear updates on stories that promise updates, and until now, I haven't made a dedicated video with an update to a previous story, as most people who submit their stories never do send updates. However, an anonymous viewer who submitted a beach story back in July of 2024 recently shared an update to their story. So I'll play the original story first if you want to refresh or maybe haven't heard it yet, or you can skip to the timestamp on the screen to get right to the update story. Beaches have always terrified me. Well, not always. My fear is a direct result of what I'm about to tell you. As a kid, I used to love the shore. I remember spending many summers in eager anticipation of the weekend when my family and I would hang out at our beach house. Or, if I was lucky, they'd let me spend it at my friend Charles' beach house, which was even more fun. I was 16, and this was one of those special summer weekends. Me, Charles, and our third friend Riley were going to spend a few unsupervised days at Charles' beach house in LBI. Riley was a year older than Charles and I, and had recently gotten his license, so we'd be driving down in his car. The drive down was fantastic. Riley was a pretty uncoordinated driver at the time, so most of the ride was spent laughing at him swerving and cursing the road. It was great. We got down to LBI in good time and immediately moved all of our stuff from the car to the rooms we'd be staying in. The layout of the house is important to the story, so I'll briefly mention it. There's a front door, a garage door which connects the back to the front yard, a back sliding door, and a back upstairs deck that connects the upstairs bedrooms. There's also a spiral staircase that allows you to go directly from the back deck to the ground, so you can enter and exit the house from upstairs. The house sits along a lagoon, meaning the back end of the house faces a narrow channel of water, with houses on the opposite side. We were at that ripe age where chasing girls was a priority, and a nice beach house all to ourselves was the perfect occasion. We spent a few hours figuring out which girls were down the shore at the time and talked to them on Snapchat. Finally, we found a group of 3 cute girls that said they'd be down to come kick back at Charles' house. I had more than enough weed to last us the weekend, and we had snagged a few bottles of our parents' alcohol before leaving. It was perfect. Things were going very well. The 3 girls, Rosie, Alexa, and Sophie, were fun and flirty, and the 3 of us could tell where the night would probably end up. At one point, the 6 of us decided to smoke in Charles' backyard pool. It was small, but it was perfect for 6 drunk kids. I remember the sight vividly. The gentle bay breeze blowing through my hair, the steam from the heated water rising slowly with the puffs of smoke from the joint. At our age, this was bliss. But then suddenly, Charles turned the music all the way down and stared over my shoulder into the darkness of the lagoon. Confused, I turned around, peering into the darkness. I could roughly make out the houses on the other side of the lagoon, but I wasn't quite sure what Charles was looking at. One of the girls asked Charles why he turned the music down, and he whispered that he saw someone standing on the dock opposite the house. I figured he was messing with us, so I started laughing. "Who cares, bro? People literally live here," I said. Charles shook his head. "I know that family personally. My parents said they're in Florida for the week." In all honesty, I still thought it wasn't a big deal or he was just messing around, so I kept chuckling. The girls were a little freaked out though, and said they wanted to go back inside. I wasn't going to argue, so the 6 of us started making our way out of the pool. As we were drying off in the yard, Riley jumped and cursed, looking towards the lagoon. The rest of us turned, and even though the light was dim, I could definitely see what looked like movement coming from the opposite dock. The 6 of us froze in place, trying to get a better glimpse of what we were looking at. Just then, a passing car on the road across from us lit up the scene ever so slightly, and the sight was horrifying. There were 4 tall silhouettes standing at the edge of the dock, facing us. It was impossible to tell what they were wearing or what they looked like, but there was no doubt they were facing our direction. "Go inside now," said Charles with a shaky voice, motioning us toward the sliding door. As we rushed inside, I heard a distinct sound that remains the most terrifying noise I'd ever heard. 4 consecutive splashes rang out from behind us. Those guys were swimming across the lagoon. We were in full-on panic mode at that point. The girls screamed while Riley slammed the sliding door shut and locked it. Charles quickly ran to the front to lock that door too, and the 6 of us ran to the room that wasn't visible from the outside. We waited in silence, horrified at what we might hear next. A few minutes passed, still nothing. Out of nowhere, Riley cursed, revealing to us that he had forgotten to lock the sliding door on the deck. Charles started to panic, knowing that this house was about to be broken into. Just then, we heard soft, quieted footsteps above us, and that was the last straw. None of us had any weapons on hand, and we were all intoxicated, so running was really our only option. The 6 of us sprinted for the front door and bolted to the car, which Riley started up in a flash. The chaos of it all was too much for Riley to handle, and he destroyed Charles' mailbox on the way out of the driveway. Once we were far enough away, we called the police. The ordeal was a nightmare. We went back to the house once police had searched it, but the news was shattering. All of the valuables on the top floor were missing, but that wasn't the worst part. Charles' family owned a medium-sized Boston whaler boat which was also stolen, most likely as the getaway vehicle. Charles' father tended to keep a spare set of keys inside a small hatch below the steering wheel, which the police concluded was how the culprits got away so quickly. How they knew where the key was hidden is something I still wonder. The police were never able to arrest the perpetrators, and likely never will. Charles, Riley, and I think whoever robbed the house might have been someone who knew Charles' family, and they knew where the key was, and the house was supposed to be vacant that weekend as well. It's been a long time since this chilling event took place, but I haven't let one day pass without locking every door and window in my home. Do yourself a favor and lock your doors at night. Okay, so I never thought I'd be revisiting this again, but I actually do have an update that's relevant to the story I sent in a while back. This update isn't exactly my story per se, but I'm gonna do my best to tell it, so bear with me. Before I get into it though, here's a quick recap of my original submission. When I was 16, I spent a weekend at my friend Charles' beach house in LBI with our other friend Riley. We were chilling in his pool with some girls we had invited over when we noticed people standing across the lagoon watching us. The next thing we knew, we realized they had jumped into the water and were swimming across, so we quickly rushed inside. Unfortunately, we didn't thoroughly lock up the house and those people broke in. By the time it was all over, the house had been robbed completely, and to top it all off, the perps had fled the scene in Charles' family's boat, which they had also stolen. As far as I knew, the authorities were never able to locate the boat or catch the thieves, and that's where things ended. Admittedly, Charles and I fell out of touch after going to separate colleges and moving to different cities, so it's not like I was there to actively receive constant updates about the situation. But I recently caught up with Charles at a high school reunion we both coincidentally attended, which brings me to the following update. I wasn't even planning on going to the reunion, but my girlfriend convinced me it might be fun to see how everyone turned out, so I figured what the hell. I was flying solo, which is never fun, but the moment I stepped into the venue, I was pleasantly surprised to see that Charles was already there, talking to Riley and a few other guys from our friend group. It was a kind of cool but surreal moment all at the same time, seeing people you haven't spoken to in years that looked exactly the same but completely different, you know? I walked over and joined the circle, and it was actually really nice catching up. As the night went on, people started breaking off into smaller groups. Charles pulled Riley and me to the side and asked if we wanted to grab a drink at some random bar after things wrapped up. Riley couldn't for whatever reason. I think he had an early flight the next morning or something, but I was definitely game. So we end up at this little dive bar, just reminiscing about old times over a few beers. I can't exactly remember how, but that night at his beach house floated into the conversation. As soon as it did, Charles slapped the table like he suddenly remembered something he hadn't been thinking about. I should mention that I actually wrote some of this down in my notes app so I could tell the story as accurately as possible, or at least as accurately as Charles told me, because what he said next was pretty wild. So he starts explaining that his little brother Kieran is 19 now, and apparently he and his friends are way bigger troublemakers than we were back in the day. About a year ago, Kieran and 2 of his friends, without asking permission, decided to take the family's new boat out. This was their replacement boat, by the way. the one they got after the insurance payout from the stolen one. They took it out for what was supposed to be a late afternoon trip, along with a bunch of beer that they were going to drink while out on the water, which is obviously incredibly stupid and dangerous, not to mention illegal since they're all underage. But it gets worse. Charles said they were feeling adventurous, so they decided to anchor near Carvel Island. I had to look this up later, but apparently it's technically part of the Forsyth Wildlife Refuge, and you're not supposed to be there at night. Their plan was to anchor the boat as closely as they could safely get to it, kill the beers, then swim to shore and hang out on the island to watch the stars or whatever. So they swim to shore and find a nice spot on the beach. They're just sitting there waiting for the sun to go down, talking and whatnot, when one of Kieran's friends notices another boat that they hadn't seen before, anchored further down the shore. Kieran takes a closer look at this other boat, and from what Charles told me, he became convinced it looked exactly like their family's old Boston whaler, the one that got stolen. Now keep in mind, the boat is pretty far away and it's getting dark out, so Charles had a hard time believing his brother could be sure about it. But according to Charles, Kieran wouldn't even entertain the possibility that this was some random boat. So Kieran convinces his friends to swim out with him to get a better look at the boat, and that's exactly what they do. They swim all the way out there, and by the time they reach it, Kieran is 100% convinced that it's his family's old boat. Here's where it gets frustrating though. Kieran wanted to take pictures of the boat to show his parents, but they obviously hadn't brought their phones with them when they swam over, and by the time they would have swam back to their boat to get them, it would have been too dark to see anything clearly. One of Kieran's friends suggested calling the police, but Kieran and his other friend were terrified of getting in trouble. They had been drinking, they took the boat out without permission, and they were pretty sure they weren't even supposed to be at that island in the first place. So calling the cops was basically the last thing Kieran wanted to do. Instead, they decided to just swim back to their boat, drive it over to the other boat for some pictures, then figure out what to do once they got home. They swam back to the shore to cut out some of the swim, and as they were walking down the beach, one of Kieran's friends turned around and noticed a man walking towards them. Charles said that Kieran was positive the man picked up speed as soon as they turned around, like he was pursuing them. According to Kieran, this person also appeared to be holding a shovel, which was the scariest part. The boys ran, and the guys started running after them. They ran as fast as they could back to their boat, and Kieran looked back one more time to see that the guy was now running in the opposite direction, presumably back to his boat, which was significantly closer. The boys reached the boat and started leaving, but here's the thing. When you're operating a boat after sunset in New Jersey, there's all these regulations about how fast you can go and what lights you need to have on, so it wasn't like they could just gun it out of there. They had to follow the speed limits, which I can imagine made the whole thing even more nerve-wracking. That also meant no detour to check out the other boat. Charles said that Kieran described the ride back as the most tense thing he's ever experienced, and I believe it. Just knowing someone could be following you in the dark without being able to speed away. Kieran said he wasn't sure whether they were followed or not, but he could have sworn he heard the faint sounds of a boat somewhere in the darkness behind them. Once they made it back home, Kieran's friends again pushed him to call the police, but he still refused, saying he was more scared of his parents finding out what they had done than he was of whatever they saw on that island. The guilt ate him alive though, and he came clean to his parents the next day. All except the drinking detail, which Charles only found out because Kieran told him later. Charles said his parents were more furious at Kieran than he remembers them ever being at him, which is saying a lot. Charles' dad banned Kieran from using the house for the rest of the summer, among many other things. His parents ended up reporting what Kieran saw to the authorities, but Charles said nothing ever came of it, just like with our original incident. The police were all but useless. At that point in Charles' story, I had to interrupt him with a few questions, like how could the boat still be in use around LBI all these years later without anyone recognizing it, and why someone would anchor it so close to shore if it was really stolen. I wonder if the police ever searched the island for whatever that guy with the shovel was doing. Charles admitted he didn't have solid answers to any of those questions. His best guess about the boat was that whoever stole it might have stripped it or repainted it enough to avoid suspicion. It's not like every boat owner in the area has the registration numbers memorized, you know? As for why they'd anchor so close to shore, maybe they felt comfortable because it was a restricted area where most people wouldn't go. But my biggest questions were about the guy with the shovel. Charles just shrugged when I asked about that though, saying maybe he was burying something or digging something up. Either way, it spooked Kieran and his friends enough that they ultimately confessed to something Kieran would normally never tell his parents about, and that was pretty much it. Charles and I talked for a little while longer, and then it came time to leave, so we said our goodbyes. I still have no idea what to make of most of this, and hearing the story definitely didn't give me any closure about it. If anything, all it did was open up a whole nother can of worms that will most likely be left unresolved. On March 4th, 2022, these were the texts 21-year-old college student Gavin received after getting home from a night out with friends. "Hey, is this Gavin?" "Yes, who's this?" "It's Alex. Where you at? Send your location." "I'm at home. What happened to you?" "What number is this?" "I'm using my friend's phone. We're stranded at the bar. Can you call us an Uber to your house?" "What? Why don't you just do it?" "Dude, my app isn't working." "Just figure it out. I don't even know what that means." "Just send your address." Gavin was out with his friends Alex and Omar, and they were last with each other at a bar in Dallas called Parliament. The trio was getting ready to wrap up the night, but Alex stayed behind when he saw other friends at the bar. So Gavin and Omar went home, and about an hour passed with no contact between the three. That was when Gavin received the text from the random number, and as you see, they claimed to be Alex using his friend's phone. Alex had lost his phone, and he was using his friend's phone, who Gavin apparently had never met before. He was asking Gavin to call him an Uber, since according to him, it wasn't working on his phone. Gavin refuses, basically noting how silly that sounds, and tells him to call his own. The conversation picks up here, where Alex agrees to apparently call his own Uber and asks for Gavin's address. Gavin stated that this was around the time he was becoming slightly suspicious, but he still gave his address, however not without making a comment about how he should memorize his address by now. He says he cut him some slack due to the fact that he was drinking. Gavin asked him why he was using his friend's cell phone, to which he got a response that Alex lost his phone. He then lets them know that they're on their way, and when Gavin asks Alex if he knew his friend, he responds, "Nah, he's cool though." 10 minutes later, the number sends a text that truly starts to make the conversation suspicious. "Can we just come in through the front door when we get there?" As if asking Gavin to leave the door unlocked. It was at this moment that he started to question everything about the interaction, from the first text being, "Hey, is this Gavin?" to the asking Gavin to call them an Uber, to now the leaving the door unlocked. He tried to call the number, but it rang and went to voicemail. He then tried to text and call Alex's number repeatedly, but it would just keep going to voicemail, and the text would just say delivered. Gavin stopped answering this foreign number now, and called his friend Omar to ask him if he'd heard anything from Alex, to which Omar said he had not. After reading Omar all of the texts, Omar agreed something was off. They looked to call the bar Parliament, but there was no number listed online to call. Around this time, the number texted Gavin again, saying, "We're here, open the door." Gavin went to his door and looked through the peephole of the door. There was no one in immediate view though, which maybe at first would have implied it was all a prank. But when there was a knock at the door, Gavin checked the peephole again. There was still no one on the other side. Reality of the situation was setting in now for Gavin, as this was no longer just texts on a screen. Someone was actually on the other side of his door. So he asks, "Who is this?" Straight to the point. They reply with simply, "LOL." Gavin asks again, "Who is this?" And they reply, "Open the door." So instead of answering again, Gavin calls the police. The knocking persists for a few minutes, in long intervals. Then it stops for good when the person or people on the other end realize Gavin was onto them. Gavin went on to DM one of Alex's friends who he was hanging out with after he and Omar left. And almost instantly, the friend DM'd him back explaining that he, Alex, and their other friend were jumped by a big group of men in the street. They were all badly injured and went to the hospital. Alex's phone had been stolen, while one of his friend's wallets and phone was stolen. Alex not having a password on his phone meant all of his info and conversations were accessible. Alex's friend helped him in getting his phone locked. The police report that Gavin would get from the police who came to his house would later help Alex in getting his service provider to replace his stolen phone for him. The lack of a password on the phone meant the thieves were able to gain information such as Alex and Gavin's conversation, where they would deduce that Gavin was home alone and an easy target. So if Gavin didn't catch on to the suspicious situation, he may have been opening his door to 2 or more people ready to attack him too and rob his house. The phone number that was being used to text Gavin turned out to be another stolen phone, therefore didn't help in finding the thief. The case regarding finding the thieves and assaulters remains open. These texts were received by an anonymous viewer from his dad's ex-girlfriend, who will be named Kathy for the purpose of this recounting. The viewer will be called Rob. The reason Rob's dad ended things with Kathy was because of her increasingly erratic and delusional tendencies. Her mental health was declining for unknown reasons. Rob's dad was dating Kathy for about half a year, and Rob's grandparents both passed away during that time. Rob's dad wasn't very open at first about how Kathy would start acting all paranoid about his son's dead grandparents, about how she believed they placed a curse on her. Rob's dad cut ties with Kathy when the delusions got too ridiculous. Rob was left in the dark for the longest time about Kathy's delusions though, presumably out of embarrassment for having spent so much time with a supposed nutjob. It wasn't long after his father's breakup with Kathy that Rob would receive texts from her himself. When her attempts at reaching his father no longer worked, she clearly went to him instead. Kathy texted Rob, "Hello sweetie, I need your help." Rob replied with, "What? What's up?" "Your father's parents put a curse on me. I need you to tell me the cemetery and plot number they were buried at." "What do you mean they put a curse on you?" "I keep hearing their voices and having bad premonitions. I know it sounds crazy, but I need it to stop." Of course, being told by somebody that they were hearing your dead grandparents' voices would be a clear indication that the person is completely unhinged. So Rob went to show his dad the texts. His dad laughed and told him to just ignore her. Rob says that instead of blocking her though, he just let her continue to text him to see how crazy her text would get. She followed up later that night with, "I need to exhume their grave. If you help me out, I will sleep with you. I know you've always checked me out whenever I was in your dad's house." Rob still didn't answer, and the next day, her text got a little more graphic. Rob showed these texts to his dad, and this time his dad was not amused. He called Kathy and screamed that he would be getting a restraining order if she didn't stop. When he hung up, she kept trying to call until he ended up blocking her number. That same night, while Rob's dad was asleep, Rob was still in his den watching a show when he heard the doorknob jiggling. He went to look through the glass atop the door and saw Kathy fiddling with a knife in the key slot of the doorknob. She looked up at him and through the glass and started pleading with him to let her in. Rob called for his dad, and she started to scream no. When his dad came to the door, he screamed at her and then went to call the cops. Kathy would scream back constant obscenities and threats, waving her knife in the air. She didn't leave, and police arrived to her still at the door with knife in hand. Based on her coming to their house with a weapon and not leaving when asked, she was arrested, and Rob's dad filed for a restraining order against her. Clearly, Kathy was more than just delusional and was starting to suffer from some sort of mental illness, such as paranoid disorder. This does not mean she wasn't a danger to others though, as well as herself, evident by the knife she brought to their house and attempting to break into their house. Luckily, no one was hurt. An 18-year-old girl named Leanna, living in Hoboken, New Jersey, was at a local bar with her friend on a Saturday. That's when she got a notification that someone was trying to send her a message on Instagram. Usually people disregard these message requests, as they're messages from people you don't follow back on Instagram. In a girl's shoes, those message requests are 9 times out of 10 men sending them flirtatious and often creepy messages. A lot of people don't ever check these messages, but sometimes when you get that notification that someone sent you a message request, curiosity gets the better of you. In this case, Leanna opened the DM, and it was from some random account with no profile picture and no followers, asking her if she was at McSwiggin's, a local bar in Hoboken. Right away, this is cause for alarm, of course, because this would be coming from someone who knew where she was at that exact moment, someone intentionally using a fake Instagram account. Leanna follows with, "Yes, who's this? You look good in that pink top. Aren't you 18 though? Shouldn't be in a bar. I won't tell anyone though. Who is this? Just a guy who thinks you're really attractive." By this point, Leanna assumes it's a prank by someone she knows, and asks who's messing with her. The person replies it's neither of the names she just mentioned. Upon Leanna asking for a selfie, the person replies, "Can't." The girls look around the bar for anybody that could be alone, mainly an older, predatory-looking man. They saw a few men that appeared to be alone sitting at the bar. None of them were eyeing the girls, though. That's when she says, "Okay, bye, we're leaving." Moderately uncomfortable, the 2 girls leave the crowded bar and start walking. They go to another bar nearby, which is far less crowded than the first. They sit at the bar and order a few drinks, looking for young guys to talk to. when Leanna's phone vibrates again and she gets another creepy message from the person. It said, "This is my favorite bar, good choice." Leanna shows her friend the message, and then the two start looking around the bar for someone who could be sending the messages. And as if he was looking to be found out, Leanna saw a man sitting on the bar stool closest to the door, looking at her with a blank, wide-eyed expression. She says the best way she could describe his appearance was the killer from the movie The Lovely Bones, mainly because of his glasses, hair, and mustache. They made extended eye contact, to the point that it seemed the man was outwardly trying to be creepy, making it obvious who he was. The girls asked the bartender for help. They showed him the DM she was getting and then pointed at the man, who in response to being pointed at, started looking around the room, in any direction but towards the girls. The bartender went over and told the guy in a loud commanding voice to leave the bar without question, threatening to kick his ass if he didn't leave the girls alone. The man left the establishment, surely feeling at least some sense of embarrassment, as anyone would. Leanna and her friends stayed at the bar for about half an hour, only to avoid running into the man outside. But Leanna says their mood to stay out was gone after that creepy encounter, and they just wanted to know who that was, or how he knew Leanna and where she was at that moment. When the girls left, they began walking home. They were on 2nd Street, a quiet one-way road, especially at the hour they were walking. They were being mindful of their surroundings, making sure they weren't being followed. But even when you think you're aware of your surroundings, the unexpected can always happen. Leanna and her friend heard running footsteps from behind them out of the blue, and there was no time to react before the man grabs Leanna with one arm around her face and mouth and the other around her waist. He picked her up as she tried to scream and fight, and of course her friend did the screaming for her, and continued to hit at the man. The commotion caught the attention of people from around the corner, and a few people came to the scene. The man released his grip from the girl and walked away quickly. Nobody went after the man. The girls called the police there on the spot. Leanna showed the police the DMs, and 2 witnesses backed up their story as well. A police report was made and a case was opened to find the man in question. Leanna would speak to detectives at her home a few days later, who gathered all the information she could give. They would later use the surveillance footage from the 2 bars, but the police have not yet been able to match the man seen in the footage to anybody. As a precaution, she still has her Instagram disabled to this day. If someone is dedicated enough, they can find someone through their Instagram by keeping track of what places they go to in their pictures, what school they go to, and who they associate with. That's why it often is a good idea to keep your Instagram private. What you're about to see is the discovery made by the YouTuber Connor Kelly in the McCoy Mine in Lander County, Nevada. The McCoy Mine is a silver and gold mine at the elevation of 5,400 feet. Connor arrives in a group of 4 via motorbikes, and upon entry of the cave, everything seems normal at first. But as they get deeper into the cave, Connor notices something reflecting the light of his flashlight. As they get closer, they realize what it is.
Oh Jesus, what the fuck? It's shoes.
Oh,
Look, is that like a fossil?
It's a pile of shoes, but to make it even more disturbing, it's a pile of children's shoes. Mixed in with the shoes are various bones laying in the pile. Connor then looks further down the cave, and you can see skeletal remains of some type of animal, possibly a coyote or deer. The shoes all appear to be older, with 80s styling on a lot of them, and obviously whoever or whatever put them there deliberately made a pile out of them. Connor said they contacted police on the matter, but they didn't seem to take it seriously or care. The bones could easily be explained away as the cave being some kind of animal feeding grounds, but the pile of shoes isn't as easily explainable. There's always the question of if this was a prank to scare people, but this honestly seems like it would take a lot of effort for a prank or failed viral video attempt. A more disturbing explanation would be that this is or was a dump for abducted kids, where their shoes would be removed for whatever reason and dumped there, possibly as trophies. An example that could be compared to this was in the early 1900s in Walled Lake, Michigan, There was believed to be a sick and cruel man who began murdering kids in the area, and after he would dispose of the bodies, he threw their tiny shoes up into the branches of a tree. Eventually the man was caught and people found his tree ornamented with dangling shoes of dead children, almost as if it were one big trophy to him. Whether this is something similar to that, or just a weird prank that somebody spent way too much time on, will probably remain a mystery. But one thing's for certain, there aren't many possible explanations for this. If you're claustrophobic, this story will make you uneasy. This is the tragic tale of John Edward Jones, who was a 26-year-old medical student and family man. When he was younger, he explored many caves with his father and his brother, so he'd been exploring caves practically his entire life. But one cave proved to be too dangerous even for John: the Nutty Putty Cave. This cave was known for its notoriously narrow spaces. They were first explored by Dale Green in 1960. The cave is located southwest of Utah Lake and 55 miles from Salt Lake City. John entered Nutty Putty Cave at around 8 p.m. on the evening of November 24, 2009, a few days before Thanksgiving. John, his 23-year-old brother Josh, and several other friends and family members all decided to explore Nutty Putty Cave as a way to spend time with each other ahead of the holiday. John was married, had a 1-year-old daughter, and was attending medical school in Virginia. He had come back home to Utah to spend some time with his family for the holiday, making the story all the more tragic. About an hour into their expedition into the Nutty Putty Cave, John decided to crawl through a tight passage that he mistakenly thought was known as the birth canal. Unfortunately, this passage was way tighter. He inched his way into the narrow passage head first, moving forward using his hips, stomach, and fingers. But within minutes, he realized he'd made a terrible mistake. He knew that he was more or less stuck and had no room to turn around or even wriggle back out the way he came. He had no choice but to try to press forward. He tried to exhale the air in his chest so that he could fit through a space that was barely 10 inches across and 8 inches high. But when John inhaled again and his chest puffed back out, he got stuck for good. Josh found his brother, and in a tragic turn of events, as he was pulling at John's calves, John slid further down the shaft. What's worse is that now he was stuck upside down with one hand beneath him and the other wedged above. At this point, the two boys started to pray. Eventually, Josh made it back to the surface to call for help. But even once help came, John was still trapped 400 feet into the cave and 100 feet below the Earth's surface. Getting the people, equipment, and supplies down that far took over an hour. Due to John being stuck upside down, time was of the essence. In an upside down position, a healthy young person could live for a few hours, but probably not much more. The body is adapted to work with gravity, not against it. Blood flows the way it does with gravity's help. Our organs sit where they are because of how we stand, so John's blood pressure was falling dangerously low, and his organs would start to crush each other if he didn't get out soon. This position would also require the heart to work incredibly hard to continuously pump excess blood out of the brain. The first rescuer to reach John was a woman named Susie Motola, who arrived at about 12:30 a.m. on November 25th. At that point, John had been trapped for 3.5 hours. Susie introduced herself to John, even though all she could see of him was a pair of navy and black running shoes. John said back to her, "Hi Susie, thanks for coming, but I really want to get out." Over the next 24 hours, more than 100 rescue personnel worked to free John from the depths of the Nutty Putty. The best plan they had was to try to use a system of pulleys and ropes to try to free John from his position. Rescuers tied John with a rope connected to a series of pulleys, causing him to scream in pain due to a lack of blood in his lower body. Everything was ready, and they pulled as hard as they could, but suddenly and without warning, one of the pulleys failed. Rescuers believe the pulley came loose at its anchor point in the cave wall. The rope and pulley operation failed, and the rescuers had no other viable plans. John was trapped. With no hope of rescue and his heart having suffered hours upon hours of strain due to his downward position, John was pronounced dead of cardiac arrest shortly after midnight on the evening of November 25th. A week after John's death, the Nutty Putty Cave was sealed off for good. Perhaps the scariest part is that they never recovered his body, and his remains will stay down there forever. This one, while being kind of creepy, is also pretty interesting. A YouTuber by the name of Water Skipper posted a video exploring a cave in Oregon called the Malheur Cave. On the surface, it looks like a pretty normal cave. until the bleachers on either side come into view. Now, anyone would wonder what exactly bleachers would be doing in a cave. One might assume some kind of secret underground rituals could be going on in there. And in a place as creepy as deep in a cave, these would probably be some sick rituals. However, the cave is owned by the Masonic Lodge of Burns. For decades, the Freemason group in Oregon held their meetings in this cave, cleaning and maintaining the area. But obviously a group holding private meetings in a creepy cave is going to create bad rumors and conspiracy theories regarding both the Masons and the cave itself. One of those theories claiming that the cave hosted satanic rituals and devil worship. The cave has been closed off since 2019, when local Masons put up a gate at the cave entrance in order to stop the vandalism and graffiti that was plaguing the site. Kenny Veach is someone I've talked about before, but his story is perhaps one of the more chilling stories having to do with caves. Kenny was a YouTuber and caver who disappeared in 2014 after attempting to explore a cave he nicknamed the M Cave, which he reported hearing unusual noises from and found it suspicious as it was located 6 miles south of a top-secret airbase. As he began to enter the cave, he claimed his whole body began to vibrate. The more he went into the cave, the worse the vibrating became. He said he suddenly became very afraid and hightailed it out of there. He uploaded this video to talk about his experience with the cave.
I gotta still go over another ridge and then go all the way down a big crevice that's real narrow and gets kind of scary. I'm looking for a cave that I found, and I didn't have a sidearm when I was here before, and something about that cave just spooked me. Out of all the caves I've ever gone in, this one just made my body vibrate. The closer I got to it, the crazier my body felt, and I was like, all right, I'm not going to go in there right now, but I'm coming back someday. And I talked to some people on YouTube, and I told them, hey, I'm coming out here, you know, because they kind of called my hand on it. So I don't know if there's going to be anything to it, but it might be interesting. If I can find it, I got to relocate it, and this is a big mountain range I'm in.
Of course, the internet being what it is, people made fun of him and accused him of making the whole thing up, or at least fabricating the story. Basically, Kenny was pressured into going back to the cave a second time, even though he was afraid to enter it the first time. Kenny gave in to the pressure and returned to the cave, and he has not been seen since. His phone was found in an abandoned mine entrance, but no body was ever found. Kenny was an extremely nice and likable guy, making his disappearance and likely death all the more tragic. People believe that given the close proximity to the airbase, Kenny was actually murdered by the government. Proponents of this theory believe that the M Cave Kenny discovered was an entrance to some kind of top-secret government facility due to its close proximity to Nellis Air Force Base and Area 51. They believe that the vibrating sensation Kenny felt while near the cave was a defense mechanism to keep civilians from entering. Under this same theory, Kenny saw government secrets within the cave and was kidnapped by US soldiers when he emerged. A YouTuber by the name of Abandoned Mines 11 posted a video of what he believes to be the M Cave that Kenny described, and it's pretty credible. The cave appears to have been walled off and sealed, preventing access inside.
Okay, I made it up here to the entrance of this M Cave. There's the one side of it, comes down and then goes back up there and down. Now, this doesn't look to be very deep at all, and it looks like they were trying to wall it off. There's stacked rocks right there, as well as behind me here, like right there.
The YouTuber finds multiple items on the floor, like planks of wood and a beer bottle with no label, possibly a bottle Kenny was carrying. Most interestingly, he finds an Area 51 warning sign, which actually may back up the theories that this was some kind of entrance to an underground facility owned by the government. But this is all speculation, and what actually happened to Kenny is still unknown. I was doing some night hog hunting in the woods near my backyard. I was hiding in the tower I had built about a decade ago. In case anyone's wondering, I of course had a night vision scope attachment. I guess I'm what you would consider a hardcore hunter.
I don't want to bore you with the unnecessary story prolonging details, so I'll make this short. And I want everyone to know that though I agree this story sounds far-fetched and crazy, it is nothing but the truth. And I in a way actually consider myself lucky that I'll always have such a horrifying story to share. So, while I was sitting in the tower waiting for movement, it finally came. I took aim and found the source. But it wasn't at all a hog, or any kind of animal I was expecting. It was a person, a man wearing all black. Black sweatpants, black shoes, and a black hoodie with the hood over his head. But that wasn't the freakiest part. He was dragging a sack behind him. My heart started racing. I was pretty sure I was witnessing this guy trying to bury a body. I continued to watch him, but then he slowed down, and I swear to God, it looked as if he turned his head up to me. I ducked down under the wooden walls of the tower, shaking in my boots. Yes, I had a gun, but just the idea of using it against a person is horrifying. I lay low, praying to God that he hadn't seen me. It wouldn't make sense if he could, though. It's practically pitch black out here, or at least that was my logic. Seconds felt like an eternity as I waited for the footsteps in the leaves to move elsewhere, but I didn't hear any footsteps. All I heard was the sound of a foot hitting one of the wooden planks on the ladder of the tower. I felt the entire tower vibrate and shake as there were 2 more steps moving up the ladder. At this point, I was asking myself deep down, am I going to be able to shoot someone? But for some reason, whoever was down there decided not to climb all the way up, as I heard them jump back down to the forest ground and began dragging the sack away. I think I stayed frozen like a statue for at least 10 minutes before even peeking over the ledge again. The coast seemed clear. I had to get home and warn the police immediately. I hopped over the ledge and descended down the ladder. I turned on my pocket flashlight, which in hindsight was a stupid move considering the situation, and ran back in the direction of my house. I was only able to run for about 10 seconds or so when I heard the rapid, manic footsteps crunching the leaves from behind me. I took a look over my shoulder, and there he was, inches away from my face. I spun around and shot him in the shoulder. He stopped and screamed in agony, and I took that moment to finish my dash to my house. Again, in hindsight, I should have held him hostage somehow, but that doesn't even matter now. I called the police, who showed up within 15 minutes with a whole search squad, and I led them all into the woods to the exact location where I shot him. There was a faint yet noticeable blood trail spilled onto the leaves which led past the body bag, which the cops seized, and eventually right to the maniac, who was hiding under a log next to a tree. He was arrested and tried for the murder of Jinkwen Sakanaki, a Japanese corner store owner. I don't know the full story behind it, but I do know I won't forget this one for the rest of my life, and I'll also be telling it for the rest of my life. I was 23 years old when this happened. I'm 27 now, and there hasn't been a week that has gone by that I haven't thought about this trip. To celebrate our friend Andrew's 21st birthday, we were taking him on a trip to Vegas. He was always a laid-back and kind of shy dude, and we all knew that he hadn't yet done the deed, so we planned on getting him really drunk and to put it bluntly, get him laid. We checked into the Carriage House Hotel, which was one of the more affordable hotels that we could find. We had 2 separate rooms as there were 7 of us in total. There were 4 of us in the room that I was in. Andrew was in the room with us. The first thing we did was eat, of course, as we were all starving. We then hit the casinos just to say that we did it. Out of the 7 of us, only 1 of us left with more money than entering. We checked out a bunch of different bars, and as the night went on, things got more blurry and everything got funnier. We got into a nightclub that was going wild. We caught 2 of our friends, John and Eddie, walking out with girls. They shot us the about to get lucky look, and we understood. The rest of us were trying to pressure Andrew into approaching a girl. But even in his drunk and somewhat loosened up state, he was still too shy to approach anybody or even dance. It got to the point where we were desperate to find somebody for Andrew. We could already foresee that he wouldn't meet any girls at this rate the whole trip. We left the club in search for a working girl. You may think our actions were weird, but as most people were by that time, we were completely hammered. We approached a girl walking alone. Acting like a couple of retards, asked the girl if she would be interested in hanging out with our friend Andrew, who was very noticeably not quite as messed up as us, but still intoxicated nonetheless. The girl wasn't anything special. I could say that even in the state I was in. But we wanted Andrew to have a good time. I don't quite remember what she said in direct response to me, but I remember her voice being slightly deep to the point that I looked at my friend. I also have this slight memory of her analyzing Andrew from head to toe. Again, I don't remember what she said, but it led to her grabbing Andrew's arm and the two of them walking off down the sidewalk. We laughed as we could see how awkward Andrew already felt. None of us thought it was weird what just happened though. But just out of curiosity, to see what was going to go down, we decided to trail behind them. They didn't seem to exchange any words. In fact, it appeared as if the girl was pulling him. We followed for about 15 minutes, I would guess. It could have been much longer, but I wouldn't really know. It was a darker and quieter street. The two of them stepped into what we assumed was an apartment building, and we all laughed. But we were so proud and happy for him too. There was no point in us waiting there, so we went back to the club. At around 2 in the morning, we headed back to the hotel. Andrew wasn't in either of the rooms. I was starting to sober up a little, and a bit of concern began to arise in me. John and Eddie, who weren't with us earlier, were shocked to hear about what happened. We all kind of assumed Andrew was just spending the night with the girl. Still, it was out of character for Andrew doing anything like this, so it was just weird. I texted him and tried calling him. He never answered, but my friends told me to relax. I crashed minutes later. I woke to a ringing sound. At first, with my mind still in sleep mode, I assumed it to be an alarm clock and tried tapping at my phone to turn it off. As my head began to return to reality, I realized the phone was ringing. It was Andrew's number. I literally felt my heart drop for whatever reason. I told my friends who were already awake from the ringing. I answered, and was greeted to heavy breathing on the other end. It was Andrew, and he sounded as if he were having some kind of panic attack. I put him on speakerphone so everyone could hear. Andrew began whispering into the phone. Most of it was incomprehensible, but we made out some of what he said. We heard him whisper, "It was that woman. Guys, you gotta get over here right now." We tried to engage him, but he wasn't answering anything we were saying. The other end went silent. We were all basically screaming into the phone, asking if he was alright, where he was, what was going on. I was already shaking in my skin at that point, but what happened next only made it 10 times worse. Something broke the silence on the other end. The sound of a door being opened with force, followed by the shrill and horrific screaming of Andrew, before the sound of the call ending. We were all freaking the fuck out. I called the police and tried to remember the address, or at least the street. We were so messed up last night that I couldn't even remember the route that we took. One of my friends claimed he did though. The police came over to the hotel and they escorted us. My friend seemed to remember exactly where the building was. He guided the police past the club, down the side roads and eventually to the building. 2 officers from the front car went inside. We were to wait by the other car. A few minutes felt like hours, waiting in anticipation and in fear of the worst. One of the officers stepped out. She came over to us and asked us to come inside to confirm if the dead body belonged to Andrew. I felt like the entire world just collapsed on my head as John and Jerry both started crying. They didn't want to go in, so I followed the officer into the building, which turned out wasn't an apartment at all. Rather some kind of dark, abandoned storage building. There was the dead body, leaning out from the open closet. The emotionless face, mouth lifelessly hung open, staring up at the ceiling. It was horrible. But it wasn't Andrew. I knew it right away. The most noticeable feature, this boy had blonde hair while Andrew had black hair. The officers had already scoped the whole place out, so they didn't know what to do. I took a look in the closet that I had a feeling Andrew was hiding in. Nothing. Not even his cell phone. We all did our best to forget about it, but a little more than a month later, I got a phone call during the middle of the night once again. I picked up. There was a bad reception and nobody was saying anything. I was about to hang up when a faint yet familiar voice said, "Jesse?" "Andrew?" I yelled. The sound of a door slamming in the background on the other end was the last thing I heard before the call ended. He didn't pick up after the 5 times I tried ringing him. So what did I do? I called the police and had them trace the call. The call was not coming from Nevada at all. No, it was coming from New Jersey. In fact, our own town, and a house not too far away. They said they were sending somebody to the house, but that wasn't enough for me. I had to go there myself. I GPSed that address, hopped in my car, and floored it the whole 5 minutes it took to reach the address. It was a vacant house on a corner. I sneaked up to the front door and put my ear against it to listen for anything inside. Nothing. I crawled around back where I found an open window. I listened for a moment. There were the sounds of small snaps and cracks from upstairs. The kinds of sounds you hear from somebody standing or moving on wood. I was sure that he was in there. I hopped inside, but I didn't even get to begin my search before noticing something at the edge of the hallway. Somebody was standing there, facing me, but I couldn't see their face. All I could see were their pale, exposed legs and long black hair down past their shoulders. It was a woman. I was feeling sick to my stomach, anticipating her charging up to me like in some kind of horror movie, but instead, she turned and ran in the opposite direction. I heard the sound of a door slamming shut, followed by footsteps stomping downstairs, and then yelling of a man and woman. There was an even heavier pair of footsteps now stomping up the stairs. That was my cue to run. I left the house and dove into the bush. Not even 5 seconds later, someone stepped out onto the porch, and for the first time in months, it seemed as if luck was finally on my side as a police car pulled up to the curb, flashing its siren. I heard the guy on the stoop mutter, "Shit," before slamming the door behind himself. The police followed inside. Apparently the idiot didn't even lock the door. I stayed hidden, as I didn't want to startle the cops and end up with a bullet in my skull. I waited by the car out front, and minutes later, one of the officers came outside with the guy in cuffs. I introduced myself and warned that there was also a woman in there, but they never found the woman. In fact, one of the bedroom windows were completely open, which implied that she escaped. Andrew was found upstairs, locked in a closet. He was in horrible shape, malnourished, hair long and dirty. You could smell him from a mile away. The police ran the records for the man. He was never married, so they really had no way of finding out who the woman was. He even claimed that he had only known her for a day. Nothing made sense, and it still doesn't. Andrew admitted that he was raped, beaten, and hardly fed. I can't even imagine admitting something like that to someone. The girl that originally escorted him to that building was only there to collect payment from what he described as the operators. For some reason, they forced Andrew to give them his hometown and addresses of everyone that was with him that night, which explained why they were in our town, but not actually why they were in our town. Like, what their intentions were. To kill us? To add us to whatever kind of sex slave operation they were running? I'm the only person he's told out of our group of friends, and whenever somebody asked about it, I just said I don't know what happened. Things were finally starting to look up, when a few days later, I got a text message from a random number one late night, saying, "Fuck you." Whoever it was blocked me, as I couldn't respond, so I just blocked them back. It happened again the next week, and then the next month. Sure, I had the idea that it had something to do with the incident, but I had no idea it would be taken as far as it was. I woke up one night with a hint of brightness in my room. There was light from outside, in the backyard, shining ever so slightly through the closed blinds. It wasn't sunlight. It was the backyard porch light. I could see a shadow moving in front of the blinds. Somebody was definitely out there. I couldn't really see out of the crack at the bottom of the blind, so I inched it up ever so slightly. There was somebody standing by the window, looking right at me, as if they were waiting for me. But they were gone before I could even think about grabbing my phone to get a picture of them. I strongly believe it was that woman I saw in the house. That was the last time I saw or heard from anyone involved in this shit. Nothing of this whole situation has made a single ounce of sense, even with the best explanation Andrew could give me. I don't see a point in getting into how Andrew and everyone else is doing, as it's nothing interesting. The only thing I can say is I'm waiting for the next time I see any of these animals, and I'll be ready to call the police or take them on myself.
On the night of April 18th, 2021, at around 7:40 p.m., an Australian man named Mitch Cooney was driving down the Hume Highway in Bardia, Australia. He was returning from a racing event and heading home to Gold Coast City, when, completely out of nowhere, he saw a childlike figure standing in the middle of the road. The figure was wearing a blue parka, and from the few seconds he was in view, it looked like he was trying to cross the highway. Now, Mitch was driving at nearly 60 miles an hour, or around 96 kilometers per hour. He was also towing a large toy hauler behind his car. Trying to brake or suddenly move out of the way in these conditions would have certainly resulted in a devastating accident, so Mitch had no choice but to keep driving. Fortunately, he managed to avoid the mysterious figure by mere inches. Fearing the safety of a potential child wandering the Hume Highway, his mother, who was also with him at the time, contacted the Australian police almost seconds later. The officers online assured them that they were putting patrols out immediately. However, Mitch couldn't stop thinking about what he saw. Trying to do everything he could, he called the police again at 8:29 p.m. and offered the dashcam footage he'd captured of this figure. But to Mitch's surprise, the officers told him that they swept the area and actually found a young child matching the description he provided, and that he was being returned to his home as they spoke. What a child was doing in the middle of a highway at night, miles from the nearest civilization, was still a big mystery, but at least he was safe now. As Mitch put it on Facebook later that night, "I felt absolutely sick when all this happened. I instantly felt so much better when I was told the kid had been collected." However, just when Mitch thought everything worked out okay, things took a wild turn. After confirming that the kid was safe, Mitch uploaded the video from his dashcam onto the internet, hoping to share the unnerving encounter he had with others. But as the video and his story gained traction, the New South Wales Police Department came forward and announced that they didn't find any child on the highway that night, completely contradicting what they had told Mitch that night. According to the official report, they scoured the surrounding area for nearly 8 hours, searching until 3:45 a.m. before finally calling it off and finding no trace of a child nearby. The department stated that multiple cars attended and commenced a search of the area. However, no child was located and the search concluded. Now, there's no reason to believe that the NSW police would lie on an official report like this. What's more likely is that the person talking to Mitch earlier didn't know the full details and just made things up. Or maybe it was nothing more than a terrible case of miscommunication, where the police searching for the child somehow got twisted into them already having found him. But if the child was never found, what happened to him? The answer to that question, however, could be anything. Maybe its parents noticed their kid missing and took him back home, or he could have been potentially kidnapped by someone who saw a child roaming the highway alone at night and took advantage of the opportunity. Though none of those theories explain how the child got to that spot in the first place. Unfortunately, the case remains an unsolved mystery to this day, and with so little coverage, it's unlikely we'll get answers anytime soon. On May 8th, 2021, TikToker Pissed Pasta, real name Malie Perales, was returning from a night out with her friends and roommates around 2:30 a.m. However, what was supposed to be a fun hangout took a disturbing turn when, while driving down the Packer Drive Northeast Road next to the Rogue River in Belmont, Michigan, one of them spotted a shadowy figure crawling onto the road.
What the
Stop. No,
Stop.
I'm not. No. Hell no.
What the dude?
Bro. They were soaked.
After discussing for a bit, the group decided to circle back and check what it was, and this is what they came across.
There she is.
Bro, what the See? That was it. That was it. She's crying.
It looked like a young woman, possibly in her 20s or 30s, sitting on the road while either waving at the car or banging her own head. She was also drenched from head to toe in 48 Fahrenheit or about 9 Celsius weather. Malie's group circled back one more time to confirm what they saw, and this time the woman had completely collapsed onto the road. By this point, Malie and her friends had realized that this woman was likely in dire need of medical assistance, but there was also a chance that this was a setup for a robbery, so they made the smart choice and called 911 without getting out of their car. The first responders and the police arrived shortly after and took her to a nearby hospital. Malie returned to the spot they found her a few hours later, and it was still wet from the water dripping from her clothes. More importantly, she also found dig marks on the roadside near the river, suggesting that the woman had likely fallen in and swam out onto the road just minutes before Malie's group passed by. After some investigation, the police also found her car parked behind a house near the river. In other words, she most likely fell into the river on the east side and managed to swim all the way across to the other side. Inquiring about her in the Facebook group for this neighborhood also revealed that she had actually interacted with some of the residents earlier that day, though her interactions were unnerving to say the least. Saw this person between Van Dam and Packer Woods around 10:15 p.m. Friday, asked her if she needed help, to which she responded no. Another quote, "There's another report by a guy on Douglas Street in the West Siders uniforms page who had a similar situation with a woman walking into his home this week. She walked right into someone's house yelling, 'Hello, hello, hello,' then just left. She was wandering the backyard too." Though who she was and how she ended up there is still a mystery. Over the next few days, she recovered enough to tell investigators that she was from Kalamazoo, a town that's over 60 miles away from where she was found. But she didn't have any memory of ever driving to Belmont, which sounds strange at first, but actually has a surprisingly plausible explanation. You see, this woman was a 28-year-old Chinese student named May, who went missing from Kalamazoo on May 6th, 2 days before she was discovered in Belmont. Before going missing, she also told her friends that she felt like she had a stalker. Upon hearing this, one of the first theories that comes to mind is that maybe she was kidnapped and then thrown into the river by this stalker. But it's important to note that according to the few witnesses in the police investigation, she drove to Belmont on her own. It's unclear whether this stalker was even real or not. However, the stress of feeling like she was constantly being watched likely messed with her mental state and triggered a dissociative fugue state, which, for those who don't know, is a mental condition where the person forgets who they are and often starts doing things they otherwise wouldn't do. Some even go as far as moving to other cities and building new lives before they snap out of the state and come to their senses. What makes this already unsettling condition even worse is that the patient usually doesn't remember what they did during that fugue state either, and that's what likely happened to May. She got stressed, went into a fugue state, wandered around in her car for a couple of days, and eventually ended up in the river. Fortunately, she was able to come to her senses and swim to the shore before losing her life. On the 12th of October 2016, a family in Sheffield, England, went to the Drawbridge pub for a night out, and after an evening of fun and laughter, they decided to head back home at around midnight. The roads in that area are usually deserted at that hour, so they were already on guard for any robbers or other criminals they might run into on their way back. However, nothing in the world could have prepared them for what they came across just 5 minutes later. Seconds after they rounded the corner to the Grange Mill Lane Road, a man dressed in a clown costume jumped out from the shadows and blocked the road, forcing the driver to stop. He then started waving at the car, and as soon as it came to a full stop, he started running towards it while still blocking the path forward. When the driver tried to reverse his car and go the other way, the clown started sprinting at full speed. Typically, something like this could be dismissed as just some troll or a YouTuber making a scaring people at night as a clown video, especially given that this was 2016. However, due to an incident that happened just 3 days earlier, the driver of this car had no choice but to assume the worst. You see, on October 9th, at around 8:45 p.m., a man named Simon Chinnery was attacked by a knife-wielding clown in public. Fortunately, the attacker was apprehended before he could do any lethal damage to Simon. Sadly, Simon still suffered multiple slashes to his right hand, leaving it permanently disfigured to the point of being classified as a disability. What's worse than the attack itself was that it went viral and started a craze of thousands of others trying to imitate the attacker. In some parts of the country, the police departments were receiving as many as 23 reports of people threatening others dressed as clowns per day. And while many of these imitators were nothing more than trolls who had no real intentions of harming others, there were those who took things too far, with some trying to force their way into people's cars and chasing women and children with knives. So for this driver to see a man in a clown costume blocking their car while all this was going on had to be deeply unnerving for him. Their fear became worse when they tried to flee the clown, because it started chasing them like a madman. With no other option, the driver was forced to press the pedal to the metal and hope for the best, with the clown jumping out of the way at the last second. This entire situation could have just as easily ended with the clown losing his life if he had even been a fraction of a second slower to jump away. On the other hand, who knows what the attacker might have done if the driver hadn't sped off. On June 2nd, 2018, one of the officers for Fulshire Police Department in Texas was driving back to the station after his shift, when suddenly he saw the car in front of him swerve onto the next lane to avoid hitting something. But this wasn't a tree branch or an animal. Instead, it was something that looked like the aftermath of either a horrific crime or an accident. A young woman in a blue shirt was lying down horizontally across the road and was completely still, suggesting that she was either unconscious or dead. Maybe someone decided to dump the body in the middle of the road after committing the crime. Fortunately, when the officer walked up to her, she not only responded to him, but even stood up on her own. As it turned out, she had driven her car into the ditch next to the road just minutes earlier. Later tests also discovered an extremely high blood alcohol concentration in her system. Put simply, she was driving under the influence and ended up crashing into the side. The concussion from the accident, combined with her prior intoxication, made her behave extremely irrationally, which is why she walked up to the road and lay down without a care in the world. It's nothing short of a miracle that the car in front of the officer was able to spot and avoid her in time, or she would have ended up as nothing more than a cautionary tale about driving under the influence. On the night of February 26, 1946, 25-year-old Jimmy Hollis and his girlfriend Mary Jean were returning to their homes in Texarkana, Texas after watching a movie together. But before they reached the city limits, Jimmy stopped the car on the side of the road to extend their date for a short while. What neither of them knew, however, was that this little detour would nearly cost them their lives. About 10 minutes after they had stopped, a man came out of the nearby woods and approached the car. He was wearing a white pillowcase over his head with 2 small holes for eyes. The rest of his face was completely hidden from view. He told Jimmy to get out of the car, but Jimmy initially believed that this was a prank of sorts and didn't pay much attention to it. The masked man then pulled out his firearm and pointed it towards the couple, stating, "I don't want to kill you, fella, just do what I say." Understanding the gravity of the situation, Jimmy got out of the car as the masked man instructed. As soon as he did, the man swung his weapon at Jimmy's head, knocking him unconscious. Mary tried to run away into the woods, but the man caught up and did the same to her. Thankfully, before he could go further, he got spooked by a set of approaching headlights on the nearby road and ran away. Mary immediately ran to the nearest house and asked them to call the police. Jimmy also regained consciousness and hailed down a passing car to ask for help. However, by the time the police arrived on the scene to investigate, the man had vanished without a trace. Jimmy and Marie were taken to the hospital, where it was discovered that the strike had fractured Jimmy's skull in multiple places. Fortunately, he was able to recover without any lasting injuries and describe what he remembered from that night. Both he and Mary gave the same statements about the overall build of the masked man, that he was around 6 feet tall and fairly slender. But for some reason, the two couldn't agree on his ethnicity. Jimmy insisted that he was a Caucasian, while Mary stayed adamant that he was of African origin. This contradiction, along with the seemingly unprovoked nature of the incident, led investigators to incorrectly believe the couple knew the man and were simply trying to protect him. What they didn't realize was that while Jimmy and Mary survived to give a description, the next couple wouldn't be as fortunate. About a month later, on March 24th, a man was driving down a secluded road on the outskirts of Texarkana when he noticed a car parked on the road ahead. From a distance, it looked like a young man was sleeping in that car, slumped over on the steering wheel. However, as the driver got closer, he suspected that something wasn't right, so he pulled over to the side and walked up to the other car to try to wake him up, only to come to a scene far more horrific than he could have ever imagined. Put simply, the young man had already passed away long before the driver stumbled across him. He also noticed a woman in the backseat who had sadly suffered the same fate. Police were called to the scene, and they quickly identified the two as Richard Griffin and his girlfriend Polly Ann Moore. Both were killed with shots to the head. Unfortunately, the only evidence investigators were able to gather from the crime scene was a single .32 caliber cartridge, and while they didn't know it at this point, this incident was also the doing of the same man Jimmy and Mary had encountered a month earlier. The police finally made this connection on April 14th when another couple encountered the same man while on an isolated road, and they were killed with a firearm of the same caliber. News of these three incidents quickly spread through Texarkana, putting all the residents on high alert. Fearing for their safety, most residents stopped driving at night entirely, while the remaining made sure to avoid empty roads at all costs. The masked man was also given the name of the Texarkana Phantom due to his inability to appear and disappear without a trace. And true to his name, he was becoming harder to track with each passing day, even after the FBI got involved. After 2 more months of fruitless searching, one of the investigators noticed that the vehicles were stolen shortly before each incident and were found abandoned not long after. Following this lead led to a man named Ewell Swinney, a car thief with 2 felonies to his name already. His height and build matched what Jimmy and Mary had described earlier. More importantly, when an officer tried to arrest him for the 3rd time for car theft, he claimed that he knew that the officer wanted him for more than stealing cars. Unfortunately, investigators weren't able to find any evidence linking Ewell directly to the 3 haunting road encounters. Luckily, his prior felonies allowed prosecutors to give the harshest punishment for his 3rd theft-related offense and sentenced him to life in prison. That being said, Ewell continued to deny any involvement in the 3 incidents until his end in 1994, leaving the Texarkana Phantom encounters a somewhat unresolved mystery to this day. On the 8th of January 2024, a truck driver was driving on a remote stretch of highway in Western Australia when at around 11 p.m., this driver had the most unnerving road encounter of his life. Nearly 62 miles south of Perth, he saw what looked like 2 people dragging something across the highway. They showed up almost out of nowhere, forcing the truck driver to swerve around them at a dangerous speed. But by the time he stopped the truck and looked back, they had already vanished into the surrounding darkness. Which begs the question, what were they dragging and why? Unfortunately, the answer to both these questions is extremely ambiguous. For starters, it's extremely difficult to identify what exactly they were dragging. Going frame by frame, we can see what looks like the legs of another person wearing shorts and black shoes. So maybe the 2 people were trying to hide the primary evidence of their horrific crime. But in motion, it looked more like an animal or something in between. It could even be a life-sized plush, though that doesn't explain its very human-like proportions. Regardless of what it was, however, an equally important question is why 2 people would drag something across a highway. On September 16, 2018, an Uber driver from New York shared the terrifying encounter he had with an angry man on Long Island. He was about to complete a ride when, out of nowhere, another car drove past him at a very high speed while barely avoiding a collision. But before the Uber driver could even process what had happened, the other driver slammed on the brakes and parked in the middle of the road, blocking him from moving forward. He then got out of the car, ran over, and started bashing on the windows, telling the Uber driver to get out.
What's going on? What's going on?
I don't know.
What is that?
What's that?
You blew the fucking right leg. Get the fuck out of the car right now.
Just
not
go,
getting
just
out of
go,
the
go, go, go. Just go, just go, go. Go around him. Go.
It's unclear if this was simply unprovoked road rage or an attempt to rob the driver and his passengers. Not wanting to find out the answer, the Uber driver made the correct decision and backed up to find a different route to his destination. However, there was no way for him to predict just how relentless the other driver would be. As soon as the Uber driver changed routes, the other driver got in his car as well and started chasing him no matter where he went. Things went from bad to worse as they approached a red light, which would have given the other driver a chance to catch up and do something terrible before the police arrived. But in a remarkable stroke of luck, the Uber driver found a cop already waiting on the other side of the intersection. They were able to explain the situation to the officers, resulting in the other driver getting arrested for driving while intoxicated.
Stopped the car, got out of the car, was trying to fight with me. So I backed up and turned around, and then he was pursuing me. And these girls
Call 911.
These girls called 911, and the officer pursued him.
Put simply, the other driver wasn't thinking clearly and could have been armed. If the Uber driver had panicked when he first approached, all three of them might have lost their lives. This story follows Ivan, a man who lives in the neighborhood of the Arts in a small western New York City. Over the past 10 years, he's moved around a decent amount, from his hometown where he currently resides, to Orlando, Florida, to another city in western New York, and then finally back to his hometown. He had lived in a couple different apartments since moving back to his hometown, none of them anything special, until he finally found what seemed to be the perfect apartment in the attic of an old mansion that was converted into apartments. It was downtown in the neighborhood of the Arts, an ideal place to live for young, artistic, creative individuals. Ivan moved in with one of his childhood best friends since it was a 3-bedroom and he would need roommates in order to maintain the rent for the place. The first year living there was uneventful, which was ideal for Ivan. As far as neighbors, there were 2 men who were likely a couple that always got into fights so loud that everyone in the building could hear, and on one occasion, one of them locked the other out of their apartment naked, and given that the mansion was across the street from a school, the cops were called. But as long as they didn't involve Ivan or his roommates, they would try to stay out of any of the drama. After about a year of living there, a young couple, a guy and a girl in their late 20s to early 30s, moved into apartment 2. And they seemed friendly at first, and always said hi when passing in the hall or anytime Ivan would be hanging out on the front porch. They were pretty decent neighbors for the first year to year and a half that they lived there. One day, Ivan came home from work and noticed that someone had put some furniture on the front porch. Ivan immediately assumed it was the couple in apartment 2 since they had an entrance to their apartment right on the porch. As he was getting ready to head into the building, the guy living in apartment 2 came out and introduced himself as John, and told Ivan that he wanted to build a community within the apartment building. Ivan, being a people person and caring about his community, was initially all for this idea. For the next few days, Ivan would come down after he got home from work and hang out on the porch since it was springtime and he wanted to enjoy the nice weather. He would sit on the couch on the porch and either read a book or work on his computer, and for the time being, it seemed nice that the community porch was set up. A few days after he met John, Ivan found him and another one of his neighbors talking on the porch about something that happened. Someone had stolen another neighbor's motorcycle from the driveway. Everybody ended up having a small tenant meeting where they waited for the cops to show up and tried to make the one neighbor whose motorcycle had been stolen feel better. When the cops showed up, Ivan went up to his apartment and let the police do their jobs. The next day, when Ivan got out of work, he walked into his apartment and his roommate asked him about John, mentioning that he left gifts for every apartment. Everyone got something different. Ivan and his roommate's gift was a shoebox filled with comics, books, toys, and chocolates. The roommates agreed the gifts seemed odd, but at the time, Ivan's odd gesture could still just be seen as friendly. But then, Ivan's roommate told him something that started to make him uncomfortable about John. His name wasn't John, it was Sean. Ivan considered the fact that maybe he misheard his name since they can sound similar, until he remembered that the guy even spelled out his name for Ivan as John when they first talked. Later on that same night, Ivan's other roommate, who had moved in at the end of the previous year, came home after seeing his daughters and told Ivan that Sean was outside asking for him. He told him that when he was walking up to the building, Sean had come out from the shadows of the side of the building, wearing only a pair of shorts. He asked Ivan's roommate to have him come down and help him get something out of his trunk. After everything that was stacking up, Ivan knew there was no way he was going down there to help him. Something felt wrong to him, rightfully so. Ivan woke up the next morning to go to work, and on his way out of the building, he stopped on his porch, and in the middle of his front yard was what Ivan described as a hobo garden. Sean had set up a bunch of garbage around a half-empty refrigerator that had the door ripped off. There was broken glass everywhere, and there was a patch of dirt dug up in front of it, as you can see in this picture taken by Ivan. Not only was this an extreme eyesore, but this would also be freakishly weird of somebody to do. Ivan immediately called his landlord and told him that he was not okay with that and that Sean was starting to weird everyone out. They told him they would address it, and so Ivan left it at that and went to work. When he got home from work, some of the garbage had been moved to the side of the road, but no one was around. Ivan decided that it would be better to just go up to his apartment and not get involved anymore, since he was starting to feel like something wasn't right. Ivan was only in his apartment for about 5 minutes at most before he started hearing yelling coming from outside the bedroom window, not directed towards him, just loud yelling coming from outside. When he looked outside his window, he saw Sean throwing the garbage from the yard into the street. He was freaking out, apparently yelling to himself. Then another one of Ivan's neighbors, Mark, ran up to him and tried to calm him down. One of Ivan's roommates returns home at this time, and he decided to try to help calm him down as well. After a few minutes, things went silent other than the sounds of cars driving down the street. Ivan's roommate then came inside and started telling him about Sean's freakout outside. Sean had been yelling that he doesn't think he did anything wrong. By this point, it was clear that Sean was an unhinged individual, and so Ivan told his roommate to try not to interact with him if possible. Things seemed to be getting worse and worse. It was only a few hours later that Ivan started to hear more yelling and even started feeling the building walls shake a little bit. Someone was arguing with someone, and things were clearly getting physical, evident by all the noise and shaking. Ivan contemplated calling the police, but decided to text his neighbor Mark first since he lived on the same floor as Sean. Mark didn't text back right away, not until after things seemed to calm down. Mark told Ivan that Sean got into a huge fight with his girlfriend, and Mark once again had tried to calm him down, and in response, Sean tried to fight Mark. Mark called the cops on him, and Sean ended up being taken to the station by the police. Things didn't end there though. In fact, things only got worse. That Friday night, Ivan stayed at his girlfriend's apartment after the couple had a date night. When he woke up that morning at her place, Ivan had a slew of messages and missed phone calls. When he opened up the first message from his roommate, the first thing he saw was a picture of fire trucks outside of their apartment building. Apparently Sean had burnt down his apartment. Ivan's roommate said that only Sean's apartment was burnt up, but Ivan still rushed home after hearing that so he could figure out what exactly was going on. When he got there, Mark and Ivan's roommate were standing on the porch. Sean claimed that something went wrong with his stove and that was it. But when the firefighters checked the building, they found that the vents around the outside of the house looked like they had been stuffed with towels and clothes, as if he were trying to keep the fumes from escaping. The cops were called, and Sean was taken away once again. But still, that wasn't the end of it. Sean officially got evicted that week, and that following Monday, Mark had gotten word that Sean had been released from holding. All the tenants were a little nervous to hear that. That Tuesday night, someone had showed up to the building and busted a bunch of the windows around the apartment, and very clearly tried gaining access to apartment 2. That someone was obviously Sean. There were also drawings, swastikas, and writings left on the back door, saying pig, land is free, kill, and Roy. Mark had enough and filed for a restraining order against Sean. Unfortunately, that only aggravated Sean more. Over the night on Wednesday, Sean would make another attack. Ivan woke up once again to a slew of texts. Mark and Ivan's roommate had apparently tried to wake Ivan up overnight, but he was in too deep of a sleep to hear them. Ivan opened up Mark's text since he saw he sent him the most messages, and there were a bunch of pictures attached. The pictures were all of Mark's car, burnt to the ground, completely destroyed. Sean was erratic and dangerous, and now all the tenants were living in fear of what he would do next. The next night, all the tenants in the building had a meeting on the front porch. Mark filled everybody in on all the information that he gathered on Sean. Apparently, Mark had been in contact with Sean's mother, who was trying to smooth things over by being transparent with Mark. He found out that Sean was planning on skipping town. Mark also managed to get footage of Sean walking over to Mark's car overnight and then walking away. There was a case here, but that didn't make anyone feel better about anything. As all the neighbors talked, everyone shared everything that they could. The woman in apartment 3 told everyone that one night, she walked by her window only to see Sean out there, standing on the side of the building, using a bag of water that he filled with holes and just staring at her while doing so. The woman in apartment 4 had been receiving stalker-esque notes and poems in her mail. Everybody in the building was being terrorized by this guy. The last bit of information given to Mark by Sean's mom was quite disturbing. Sean's mom said that he had been following Ivan, his roommates, Mark, and the woman in apartment 4. Not only that, but Sean had followed Ivan to his girlfriend's house and watched them through her windows. Ivan knew the man was dangerous and was now stalking him and potentially his girlfriend. For the next week, if Ivan wasn't standing guard on his front porch, he was checking in on his girlfriend's house. Thankfully, a few days later, the tenants finally got news that Sean had been arrested. Shortly after that, Mark and half of the other tenants moved out of that building since they had had enough. Ivan and his roommates have stayed living in the building to this day and haven't had any issues since, but hopefully for their sakes, Sean won't be getting out of jail anytime soon. This story was sent by Joseph Robinson and took place in 2017. He had just moved into his first apartment after moving out of his parents' house. It was an old 2-story home built in the 1930s and had been converted to 3 units, with 2 downstairs units and 1 upstairs unit. Joe was in the upstairs unit, which was a decent-sized 2-bedroom unit with a large kitchen and a pantry. He lived with his German Shepherd. At the time, only one of the bottom units was rented out, and he knew this because there was a car parked under one of the 3 spaces in the back of the building. That was the only way he could know someone was there, as they never left the house, and Joe knew this because he worked from home most days and did event photography during the night at a local theater. Throughout the time Joe would be home during the day, he never saw anyone leave the bottom unit, but he knew someone was there because he could hear the sounds of someone walking around and talking. After living there for almost 3 weeks, Joe started to notice strange things, like rustling in the living room walls and a thumping coming from the guest room. If he left the house, he would come back to find things moved around and sometimes missing. He had the management company change all the locks, but even after this, these strange things would continue. One night the theater was closed for repairs, so Joe didn't leave the house that night. Joe's brother needed to borrow his car as his was in the shop. The house was about a 10-minute walk from the downtown car garage where his brother had just left his car, so Joe's brother just walked over to borrow his car. The two caught up a bit, and then he took Joe's car to do whatever it was he had to do. Joe stayed inside for the rest of the day and got caught up on some editing he had been putting off. At around 9:30 p.m., he started to hear a voice down the stairs leading to the front door. The way the house was set up, there was a door that led outside a little entryway with a staircase that led to the actual apartment upstairs. This entryway shared a wall with the occupied unit upstairs. So Joe thought it was just the echo coming from the downstairs neighbor. However, it started to get louder and louder until he could clearly hear what the man was saying. He was arguing with himself and laughing hysterically. He kept telling himself it was time, only to follow up with a loud and aggressive no. Joe started to get a little freaked out and debated calling the police multiple times, but after about 45 minutes, he stopped and everything was quiet again. Feeling uneasy but too tired to stay up, Joe decided to call it a night early. On this night, Joe's dog was with him. She usually would stay at his parents' house when he wasn't home or when he'd leave at night for his photography work. But since he was off that night, she stayed with Joe the whole day. The two got into bed and went to sleep around 11 p.m., and it wasn't until around 4 a.m. that he woke up to the sound of his dog growling. Not a soft growl like when a dog sees a cat. Joe described it as a deep, rough, I'm gonna tear you apart kind of growl. He jumped up and went looking for her, and she was in the kitchen facing the pantry. As Joe rounded the corner, he heard the sound of a door slam in the pantry. However, once he got to the pantry, the door was still open. Joe's dog continued to growl and walked into the pantry and started pushing on the back shelf. Joe went in after her and turned on the light, and he noticed a very small gap between the back shelf and the wall of the pantry, and so he pushed on it, and this revealed a secret room behind the pantry. Joe's dog tried to run inside, but he caught her before she could go too far. There was a small hallway with a drop down at the end of it. Joe didn't go inside though. He called the police immediately. They came and he explained the situation. They went downstairs and got Joe's neighbor to open his door. What they found was disturbing. They found a large hunting knife and a panel missing from a wall in his closet that led to the room in Joe's pantry. The building owner said it was what was left after the renovation that turned the home into 3 units. Joe moved out that week. Shortly upon moving into their new home, a Utah couple found something that wasn't included on the listing for their home. That might sound exciting, but what they found to them was anything but exciting. The couple stumbled across a hidden room in their house, and it looked exactly like a torture dungeon. The couple found the entryway to this hidden den behind a pretty average-looking bookcase in a room that appears to be just an ordinary lounge. The wife/mother said that the bookcase positioned against the wall looked off, so she decided to try and move it elsewhere, and this was when she soon realized that the bookcase was actually secured on and was disguising a secret door that the couple had no idea existed. The room wasn't included on the listing, nor mentioned by the realtor or the previous owners of the home. The woman shared pictures on Reddit showing the stages of her opening the bookcase before revealing the creepy room lurking behind the wall. The image taken relies strictly on the flash from the phone's camera, but it shows the concrete room that contains one random fold-out chair sitting in the middle of the room. Various other objects can be seen around the space that led Reddit users at the time this was posted to speculate that the room could have been used as some kind of torture room, or even used as some kind of bunker for a killer. Of course, Reddit and the internet in general will always come up with wild theories, and while finding this room in your house would definitely be a bit creepy, there's no proof the room was ever used for malicious purposes. The couple later turned the room into a mini gym. However, a much more mysterious Reddit post that was posted 4 years ago in April of 2019 similarly shows a picture of an entrance to a hidden room in somebody's house. The only difference here is the Redditor who posted this never made a follow-up post or uploaded any pictures of what was beyond the door. The Redditor who shared this found this creepy-looking door hidden in his basement, and what made it extra weird was that there was a big metal shelf purposefully blockading the door, as if to deter anybody from entering. The Redditor claimed it was done so by the previous owner. The post contained no additional info, but what makes this whole thing stranger was that this was the last post to ever be made from this Reddit account. This was a pretty active Reddit account before this post. Because of this sudden disappearance after this already mysterious Reddit post, some people speculated that the person did in fact enter the room and found something in there. Something that may have led to his disappearance or death. People have tried to find out more details about the Redditor to find out where he lived and find any possible news articles relating to disappearances, but there has been no luck. For now, whatever happened here remains unknown. This next one comes from viewer Milad Hussein, who's a father of a teenage girl currently in military school. Recently, Milad had been cleaning out his house with his buddy Jacob, and suddenly out of nowhere, Jacob started yelling for Milad, saying that he found a small hidden door in his daughter's room. Milad had the permission from his daughter to clean her room before doing so. He was shocked to hear the words hidden door, and so he ran to his daughter's room and found Jacob in the closet. There was where Jacob found a secret doorway, which once opened, led to a stairway that led to a basement area that Milad had no idea of. His landlord never told him about it. Milad included this image of the stairs leading to the small basement. Once they got to the basement, they found themselves in a small room with a horrid smell. So horrid, in fact, that the two men considered leaving the basement altogether. Inside the basement was a small table covered in weird dark red stains with a big book, a total of 28 pens which had no ink left, and a mountain of trash with an old laptop on the table. The two men wondered if someone used to live down there a long time ago simply based off how old the laptop was. Milad then decided to look inside the book, and he was heavily disgusted by its contents. There were writings of somebody's plans to brutally slaughter the bullies from school, and he recognized the handwriting to be that of his daughter. One short passage in the book read, "Goodbye world, goodbye. There's nothing in this world. I'm useless. I have a Glock in my hand while writing this. I will pull the trigger anytime soon. I'm slowly destroying myself. Help me. On another page of the little diary, there was a note that said, "I will rip blank into shreds and drown her in her own blood. I have no remorse for what I'm doing. I am aware that I'm going to murder someone who caused me pain and shame for the past 9 years. You will regret it. Say hello to my new weapons." The third image from the diary he attached was a diagram of her school and her plan on targeting it and her bullies with her friend who was experiencing the same issues as her. Unfortunately, all the images were pretty blurry. I'd say it's safe to assume Malad confronted his daughter after finding these notes, but I was never able to get confirmation from him as he never replied to any of my emails, unfortunately. This last story comes from a viewer named Sal from Hope Mills, North Carolina. In the summer of 2022, he and his friend Connor moved into an upstairs apartment in a 2-family home in town. They didn't sign a lease or anything. It was a listing they found on Facebook Marketplace that offered month-to-month rentals. Sal contacted the landlord Tom, who did not live in the house. There was a tenant already living in the downstairs apartment who drove a red pickup truck that was almost always in the driveway. The upstairs apartment was decent, nothing too modern or fancy, but they saw it as a nice temporary place to escape from their parents' houses. The apartment had 2 bedrooms, ample closet space, a living room, 1 bathroom, and a small kitchen. The 2 bedrooms were on opposite sides of the floor, with a long hallway connecting them, and the living room in the middle of the hallway. All of the rooms and the hallway were carpeted. There was a big closet in the hallway that would otherwise be used as a jacket closet, but given that they were only going to be there for the summer, they were going to use this as a small storage closet. Right from the get-go, Sal would feel like he'd be hearing noises coming from above the apartment, usually cracks in the wood that he would keep dismissing for normal house noises. But on one of the first nights in the apartment, right above Sal in his bed, he heard what he was almost positive were footsteps. The cracks in the floor were moving, and they were at a steady pace. Sal went over to Connor's room and knocked on the door to ask him if he was hearing the sounds too, but by this point, the cracks stopped. Sal freaked out Connor with this because they were already on the upper level. Anything above them would be the attic, but they were not told of any attic by the landlord. The next day, Sal texted Tom asking if there were an attic, and Tom replied no there wasn't, and that any sounds that would come from above would just be the pipes. So once again, Sal would dismiss the sounds he heard for house noises. The sounds would continue for a few nights. Then one day, after getting home from work, Sal was home alone. Even the downstairs tenant was out. So even in the seemingly empty house, there were clear as day footstep type sounds coming from above Sal's head. He decided to look around the place for a potential attic door. There were no attic doors in either of the bedrooms or living room. He checked the big closet in the hall, and he noticed something peculiar. There was a hanging plastic garbage bag blocking something. He moved it aside to realize there was a white door, and beyond the door was a stairway leading up to another door. Sal quietly went up the stairs and opened the rickety-looking wooden door at the top, and what was beyond the door was the last thing he ever expected. There was a cramped, unkempt-looking apartment up there. He caught just a glimpse of a small, dirty kitchen, a living room with a small, old sofa, and an open doorway that led into what he presumed to be a bedroom. Sal stated that it smelled like human waste up there, and the unbearable stench was about to chase him out of there anyway, before he heard cracks in the floor come from inside that small bedroom-looking room. Sal quickly left the floor back down the stairs he came up. He locked himself in his room and called 911. When the police got to the house, Sal let them up the stairs and showed them the secret passageway to the secret upstairs floor, and the police found a homeless-looking and smelling man in a small bedroom on the 3rd floor. When Sal told the landlord, he arrived on scene and came clean, explaining that the man on the 3rd floor was his troubled brother, and he needed a place for him to stay. The 3rd floor that was once an attic was secretly converted to a small living space, but it lacked a bathroom, hence the horrid smell, and according to what the police told Sal, there was human feces in the sink up there. Sal and Connor had only been in that apartment for a few days, but that would have meant at some point that man likely came down into their apartment and may have taken food from them. The landlord was arrested for breaching a number of tenant privacy rights, which even without a lease, month-to-month renters are still protected under these laws. Sal and Connor both pressed charges on top of this, and they moved out all of their stuff the same day this happened with the police nearby. There are all kinds of people on YouTube. It's a place where anyone can vent to an audience or express themselves. That's why these stories of YouTubers turned killers are especially disturbing, as their video histories in a sense document their descents into madness. Elliot Roger was an English vlogger known for creating videos in his car, often telling of his depression for not being able to attract girls and how life was unfair. In most of his videos, Elliot displayed narcissistic tendencies by expressing his confusion and why girls don't pay him any mind despite his self-described good looks, good personality, nice car, and sense of fashion.
I've been attending college in Santa Barbara for about 2.5 years now. And in those 2.5 years, I've experienced nothing but loneliness and misery. And my problem is girls. There are so many beautiful girls here, but none of them give me a chance, and I don't know why. I don't know why you girls are so repulsed by me. It doesn't make sense. I do everything I can to appear attractive to you. I dress nice. I'm sophisticated. I'm magnificent. I have a nice car. A BMW. Well, it's nicer than 90% of the people in my college. You know, I'm polite. I'm the ultimate gentleman. And yet, you girls, you never give me a chance. I don't know why.
On May 23rd, 2014, Elliot uploaded a video to his YouTube channel, once again complaining about how females would throw themselves at obnoxious men over himself, and that they would be punished for not showing him interest.
For the last 8 years of my life, ever since I've hit puberty, I've been forced to endure an existence of loneliness, rejection, and unfulfilled desires, all because girls have never been attracted to me. I don't know why you girls aren't attracted to me, but I will punish you all for it. It's an injustice, a crime, because I don't know what you don't see in me. I'm the perfect guy. And yet you throw yourselves at all these obnoxious men, instead of me, the supreme gentleman. I will punish all of you for it.
That same day, Elliot made headlines for killing 6 people and injuring 14 near the University of California, Santa Barbara in the infamous 2014 Isla Vista massacre before taking his own life after a police pursuit. On that day, he stabbed 3 men in his apartment, and about 3 hours later, he drove to a sorority house, and after failing to get inside, shot 3 women outside and later shot a male student in a nearby deli. Elliot would later speed through Isla Vista and get into a gunfire exchange with police, suffering a non-fatal wound to the gut. During the police pursuit, Elliot would fire at the police from his vehicle and hit people with his car. After crashing into a parked vehicle, Elliot took his own life with the same gun he'd been using. Perhaps what makes this scarier than any other murder spree is that the fact that Elliot's final video shows him outlining the details about his upcoming attacks in an attempt to punish women for rejecting him and to punish sexually active men for living a more enjoyable life than his.
On the day of retribution, I am going to enter the hottest sorority house of UCSB. And I will slaughter every single spoiled, stuck-up, blonde slut I see inside there. I'll take great pleasure in slaughtering all of you. You will finally see that I am, in truth, the superior one, the true alpha male.
After the video was made public, Roger emailed a lengthy autobiographical manuscript to approximately a dozen acquaintances and family members. The document, which he titled My Twisted World, was made available on the internet. In it, he described his childhood, family conflicts, frustration over not being able to find a girlfriend, his hatred of women, his contempt for minorities, and his plan for what he described as retribution. Elliot goes down to be perhaps the most well-known example of a YouTuber turned killer. Trey Sessler, better known as Lenscat Productions or Mr. Anime, was an anime and film enthusiast who once reviewed anime on YouTube.
Well, today I'm reviewing Maple Story. Let's get right to the Maple Story. There's a legendary tree that lives on Maple Island. Well, it used to live there. It was destroyed a long time ago.
Back in 2006, Trey was known for basically kickstarting the YouTube anime community with his reviews. He helped inspire some of the biggest names in the anime community, and was generally considered to be a very well-known personality on the internet. But somewhere along the way, Trey's videos transitioned from being about normal things like anime, video games, and even talking about guns, to videos about serial killers, killing animals, and using real guns. In February 2012, he announced that he was taking a break for 2 to 3 weeks to reward himself for his work.
This is just an update video to let you guys know that I'm going to reward myself with probably a 2 or 3 week break coming up here from YouTube videos, anime reviews in particular. I might do some blog stuff. I want to thank you guys a lot for sticking with me and watching the channel. I got more subscribers than ever. I have more views than ever, and everything is going really good.
On March 20th, 2012, Trey took the lives of his mother, father, and older brother Mark. After committing the act, he wrote on the walls, "Why did I do this? I love my mom, dad, and brother." Trey's fascination with guns was seen early on, but nobody could have ever suspected he would commit the heinous acts he did. Friends even described him as a highly intelligent and kind-hearted guy. Interrogations found that he had actually done what he did to his family to spare them from knowing that he planned to target Waller Junior High School, with his goal being to have at least 70 victims.
I would protect them with my life, but at the same time, if anyone was going to hurt them, it was going to be me. Or they were the first immediate human targets in my sight. And if I was going to go out and do anything, they would have to go. And I'm like, there's my opportunity. Go ahead, go get him.
A close friend of Trey's, Tyler Adams, claimed that Trey's mind had gone astray over the years, and the only true sign of his decline was that his videos and movies would get more and more violent as time passed. Once he was arrested, Trey was sentenced to life in prison. In late 2020, his channel was terminated. Samantha Walford is a former YouTuber who aspired to become an actress. Samantha was a mother of 5, married to her husband Ernie, whose relationship she documented in her YouTube videos. She would constantly complain about her husband working all the time, even though they had 5 children to support. She would also complain about his love for playing video games. In fact, the reason for their marriage was because in 2014, the couple got into a fight over Ernie's gaming character marrying a female character online, and so Samantha threatened to leave Ernie, but to end the battle, he asked her to marry him. Samantha would complain that there was no thrill in her life, and that she wanted to be a famous actress. On the night of February 20th, 2015, Samantha would give her 5 children high dosages of Ambien so that they could sleep through what was going to happen that night. Samantha had hired 3 men to kidnap and murder her husband. The 3 men would enter the home, and before abducting him, they would beat and whip Ernie in front of his wife. Ernie pleaded and begged them not to hurt his family during this process. No one listened. They then dragged him out to the middle of the woods where they killed him. Once an investigation went into place, Samantha was interrogated. However, police didn't buy her story. During the interrogation process, Samantha tried to point the authorities in the direction of Jonathan Sanford, one of the 3 kidnappers, claiming that she met him at the hospital while visiting a friend, and that he took offense upon hearing about her husband's abusive behavior. Sanford was arrested along with his brother Jose Antonio Ponce, and the 2 were charged with aggravated kidnapping. However, the 2 men were able to provide proof that Samantha was the mastermind behind the plan, along with a 3rd kidnapper, Octavius Rhymes.
Talking about her relationship with me and Jay and my sister-in-law and all that, and me trying to talk to her and help her out and all that, because she seems like a good person to me. And she was explaining to me how he treats the kids and all that. If I ever see it, or if I happen to be around, or if I ever see her with bruises or the kids
Jonathan brings the sheriff to Ernie's body, a remote location in the woods. Ernie was in his boxers, having been beaten to the point that he was no longer coherent, right before Ponce shot him in the back of the head. The three men had initially planned to plant drugs in Ernie's vehicle and call the cops on him. However, things changed when Samantha requested that they just kill him. Samantha denied knowing the three men that did this, but her phone records would eventually prove otherwise, having been in contact with all three of them before the murder. Samantha was sentenced to 99 years in prison. Many believed that she did this for fame, while others thought that Samantha did this because Ernie threatened to leave her and take the children with him. Being a mother who put her children through neglect for a YouTube channel was clearly not something Ernie was willing to settle for. Randy Robert Stair, who called himself Andrew Blaze, was a YouTuber who worked at Weiss Markets. He had kept detailed videos, recordings, and journals leading up to what he'd eventually do on his YouTube channel called Pioneers Productions, but also to other social media profiles and online forums. In these uploads, he expressed his willingness to end his own life while addressing the personal tragedies he's experienced, which led him to a depression. He would also begin to question his gender identity.
The more I wore girl clothes, the more I felt like that was who I was. Like I felt like I was a girl, and I found out that I was. I was never meant to be a guy. I was just a female soul trapped in a man's body my whole life.
And as he continued his downward spiral, he would begin to provide detailed explanations of his plans for carrying out a shooting, and explained his belief that these murders would allow him to cross over to an animated world he'd imagined. Randy also had a concerning obsession with the Columbine High School massacre, and seemed to look up to the perpetrators Dylan and Eric as his heroes. Randy's YouTube channel featured short sketches and collaborations he had done with other content creators, but in 2014, due to a number of alleged unfortunate events that had happened in his life, Randy explained to his audience that he'd be taking his content in a different direction. This led to the creation of Ember's Ghost Squad, a series based on a fictional character from the Nickelodeon show Danny Phantom, due to his obsession with the character Ember McLean. On the night before the shooting, Randy uploaded a final video titled Westboro High Massacre. In it, he describes his hatred towards the people involved with the series because of how he believes they screwed him over. It then featured an animated sequence depicting him and one of the characters from Ember's Ghost Squad firing into a fictional high school, before ending with montages of previous videos explaining the motives behind the shooting.
But, my life's not been the greatest. We've all got problems. It's not just me. Everybody does. And then sometimes those things just make you make bad choices,
The next day, Randy arrived for his late-night shift at Weiss Markets during closing time at around 11 p.m. Randy went to the back of the store to the crew area and blocked an emergency exit at the far back of the store. He then continued with his duties, stocking shelves and cleaning up from the previous day. Randy then went back to the crew area in the back of the store, blocked the remaining exits, then locked the automatic doors at the main entrance to the store. He then pulled out 2 shotguns that he had concealed in a duffel bag and walked around the store and took the lives of 3 co-workers. One co-worker who managed to survive and escape called the police, but by the time police had arrived, Randy had already taken his own life.